Rebellion leaves the imperial family of Hadelamid in ruins after an ugly downfall. Reflecting on the chaos, Eve admits she knew this day was inevitable.
Eve recalls her failed attempts to advise her father on changing the homunculus system.
Narrative reveals the homunculi were brainwashed tools forced to obey the imperial family.
Under the guise of peace, the homunculi performed the Empire's most dangerous tasks. Elite homunculi became trusted imperial knights, yet they only received slightly better treatment. Despite their status as knights, they remained essentially slaves to the royal family. Resentment grew among the homunculi as the imperial family stoked the flames of rebellion. King Desmond II ignored the crisis, while Princess Bridget exacerbated the systemic cruelty. The coronation of Bridget signaled a period of even harsher exploitation for the homunculi. Homunculi outside the palace faced death through grueling expeditions and backbreaking manual labor. Inside the palace, Bridget forced homunculi knights into her harem, destroying their honor. Unable to remain a passive witness to the atrocities, Eve decided to take action. Eve devoted herself to research, seeking a way to resolve the deepening crisis. Eve reflects that while a powerless princess faces fate, her actions change that outcome. The rebellion begins in earnest as the homunculus knights unite to overthrow the empire. Michaelis Agneto is introduced as the powerful and defiant leader of the homunculi. Michaelis used his extraordinary powers to break the brainwashing and lead his people.
After killing Eve's father, the previous emperor, Michaelis claimed the throne for himself.
Eve stares blankly while pondering her silent and uncertain future following the coup.
Text notes that Rosanite is the only member of the imperial family who will remain. Eve contemplates her lack of desire to live under such grim circumstances. Michaelis enters the room and notes the seventh princess is finally awake. Eve identifies him as Michaelis Agneto, the personal guardian knight of her half-sister Rosanite. Michaelis, the instigator of treason, comments on Eve's shocked reaction to seeing him. Eve questions what Sir Agneto is doing in her room. Michaelis explains he simply came to see if the seventh princess was doing well. Eve questions his late-night visit while he is busy flipping the empire. Michaelis admits the past month of revolution has been quite crazy. Eve dismisses his light-hearted words and states she has no need for a caregiver. Michaelis gazes at Eve in silence as the tension in the room thickens. Michaelis looms over her, calling her Eve and noting her anger at being trapped. Michaelis insists they have things to say while Eve tells him to step back. Eve reacts with utter bewilderment to the revolutionary leader's sudden and bizarre question. Michaelis asks if things would be different had she chosen him as her personal knight. Eve repeats the term in a state of disbelief, shocked by the hypothetical scenario. Silhouette explains the tradition of royals selecting a homunculus as their personal knight. The selected knight is bound to serve their master with absolute, unwavering loyalty. Eve thinks her refusal to follow the laws of the empire made her an outcast.
Rosanite became obsessed with Michaelis and discarded her previous knight to claim him.
Eve deduces that Michaelis planned to exploit Rosanite's interest from the very beginning. Eve asks Michael if he truly believes she should have selected him instead. Michaelis suggests she would have avoided execution at the very least by choosing him. Eve accuses him of wanting a foolish puppet princess rather than Rosanite herself. The two share an intense silent gaze following her sharp accusation. Michaelis reacts with a short laugh at Eve's blunt and perceptive assessment. Michaelis calls her a difficult woman. Apparently, being deposed hasn't dampened her smear. The scene is interrupted as the door to the room is suddenly thrown open. Guards rush in reporting an urgent abnormality with the child inside the Empress. Michaelis sighs, his moment with the princess disrupted by the unfolding palace crisis. Michaelis prepares to leave, telling Eve he will see her again later.
Eve trembles in dread, wondering if he is referring to her upcoming execution.
Eve leans her head back and reflects on the inescapable terror of her fate. Eve looks up as the sound of footsteps interrupts her moment of quiet despair. A woman in a purple gown walks across the room toward the seated princess. The narrative identifies the newcomer as the eighth princess, Rosanite Nadia Hadelamid. Eve greets her half-sister Rosie and observes that she appears to be doing well. Rosanite reveals she is pregnant, explicitly confirming that the father is Michaelis. Eve is shocked, noting that homunculi are not supposed to have the ability to reproduce. Rosanite laughs mockingly, asking if Eve truly believes she slept with a different man. Eve clarifies she is simply surprised because it contradicts established knowledge about their kind. Rosanite sits beside Eve and tells her there is something she should know now. Rosanite cradles her stomach, describing the unborn child as the result of their love. Eve notes Michaelis just left, suggesting the two of them must have narrowly missed each other.
Rosanite says she visited because she was worried about Eve's execution being scheduled for today.
Eve is visibly shaken by the cold announcement of her imminent death.
Rosanite holds Eve's hands and confirms that the execution is indeed set for today.
Rosanite's expression shifts into a sinister smile as she watches her sister's fearful reaction.
Rosanite explains that knights personally executed the royal family members they were bound to serve. Rosanite describes Brigitte's incineration and asks if Eve expected a fast death by guillotine. Rosanite reveals that someone specifically requested the privilege of personally carrying out Eve's execution.
A cold portrait of Michaelis Agneto appears as Rosanite continues her cruel explanation.
Rosanite states that the homunculus chosen to escort Eve to the execution has been decided. Rosanite names Michaelis Agneto as the one person who wants Eve dead most. Eve reacts with utter bewilderment to the news that her former knight hates her. Eve realizes Michaelis likely hates her because she never followed imperial law and appointed him.
Rosanite confirms Mikhail's deep hatred while beginning to pull something out from her clothing.
Overcome by distress, Eve tells Rosie that she does not want to hear anymore.
Rosanite insists Eve must listen, explicitly stating that she will be publicly beheaded.
Eve is horrified by the mention of Hedelamide's traditionally cruel and barbaric beheading.
A bloody axe appears, illustrating the slow and painful failure of a blunt executioner's tool.
Eve breaks down on the sofa, trembling and whispering in denial of her fate. Rosanite presents an ornate glass bottle filled with a dark, shimmering liquid.
Rosanite explains the bottle contains belladonna poison to allow for a painless death. Rosanite suggests it is better to die comfortably than face a barbaric public execution.
Eve stares at the small bottle, paralyzed by the grim choice offered to her.
Eve exhales a long breath as she contemplates her sister's lethal gift.
Eve weakly thanks Rosie, accepting that this might be her only way out.
Eve apologizes for forcing her pregnant sister to be involved in this choice.
Eve insists this is her own decision and promises to take the blame.
Eve offers a final farewell, telling her sister to be well in the future.
Silence fills the room as the two princesses sit together in the dim light.
Eve looks back at Rosanite and asks if she's going to leave out. Rosanite grips Eve's hand, asking how she could leave before the poison is drunk.
Rosanite says there should be someone present to watch her sister's very last moments.
Hands reach out to remove the cap from the ornate poison bottle.
Rosanite urges Eve to hurry up and drink the liquid without further delay. A close-up of Rosanite's red eye reveals her intense and disturbing level of anticipation. The steaming bottle of poison is held out directly to the hesitant princess. Eve's eyes reflect the glowing liquid as she stares at her final lethal option.
Rosanite holds the poison bottle with a dark and expectant grin.
Eve tilts her head back and consumes the lethal liquid provided to her. Eve accepts her quick end as her hand falls limp on the sofa. An oppressive darkness flows over the garden as the scene shifts into morning. Eve lies among flowers while her final thoughts drift toward her sister Rosie. Rosanite gazes at Eve's face to confirm that she has finally passed away.
Rosanite celebrates her triumph while Eve reacts with shock to her cold betrayal.
Rosanite mocks her foolish sister while looking down at her body in victory. A heavy rain cleanses the palace exterior during this tragic shift in power.
Michaelis looks on in utter disbelief at the sight of the fallen princess. Michaelis demands an immediate explanation for the tragedy that occurred in his absence.
Michaelis kneels and reaches out to touch her silent and motionless form. Michaelis whispers Eve's name while tenderly touching her face in a broken voice.
He laments being unable to keep her by his side as he intended.
Michaelis roars for an answer from the guards present in the room. Rosanite lies that Eve committed suicide to atone as a member of royalty.
Michaelis questions the princess on how she could possibly know such specific details. Rosanite maintains her confessade and insists she witnessed the event herself.
He asks Rosanite directly if she was the one who poisoned Eve.
Rosanite deflects the accusation by criticizing his terrifying facial expression and intense demeanor.
Rosanite admits she decided for Eve since her sister lacked the necessary resolve. Rosanite justifies the murder as removing a potential disaster for their shared future.
Michaelis coldly commands the princess to be silent as he turns his back.
Rosanite asks with shocked concern if he is truly angry with her actions.
Michaelis lifts Eve's body into his arms while Rosanite begins to fume internally.
Rosanite screams his name and tries to physically block him from leaving.
Rosanite demands to know why he is ignoring his own partner in this.
Michaelis dismisses her without a second thought, ordering her out of his path. Rosanite rages at the guards for daring to touch a member of royalty.
Rosanite warns him that he will deeply regret his choice to defy her.
She shouts that she's carrying his child to force him to stop. Rosanite smirks with confidence, believing she has successfully regained control over the situation.
The scene focuses on the princess's abdomen following her shocking and desperate claim.
Michaelis laughs in mocking disbelief at the mention of her having a child. He identifies her condition as a scientific experiment rather than a true pregnancy. He explains his need for imperial blood to control the power of the stone.
He reveals he used her womb specifically for his own alchemical creation goals.
Rosanite desperately insists that the existence of their child cannot be denied.
Michaelis secretly notes her ignorance regarding the child's true alchemical and genetic origin.
He dismisses the creation as an untested experiment that is too exorbitant for her.
Rosanite is deeply horrified that he would describe their child as a monster.
He orders her removal while retorting with cold logic used by the imperial family.
Rosanite screams in betrayal as she is forcibly dragged away from the room.
She demands to know what Eve truly means to him in her final protest.
Michaelis walks away in silence, carrying Eve's limp form through the palace halls.
Michaelis grieves her refusal to ever allow him to move by her side. Michaelis pauses in the corridor, overwhelmed by the silence and weight of his grief.
Michaelis stares forward with a gaze full of grim, determined, and silent resolve. He summons the Chancellor, who responds with the formal respect due to his status.
He declares his absolute vow to save Eve through any possible magical means.
The narrative introduces Evian Rose Cloel Hadelamid, the seventh princess of the Empire, noted for her unique reputation.
Unlike the rest of the imperial family, she advocated for changing the oppressive homunculus system. Seen as the black sheep of the palace, the princess lived a life of quiet isolation. Though many homunculi desired to serve her, she refused to appoint a personal knight for herself.
A black-haired man watches her from the palace arches, captivated by her distant presence.
The man with purple eyes admits he was unable to stop himself from observing her. He watched as the court treated her with unfair scorn, leaving her alone in the crowd.
His frustration grows as he observes her suffering from the shadows of the palace pillars. He realizes with a heavy heart that his own emotions have become far too transparent.
Despite his better judgment, he finds himself drawn to the garden where she sits alone.
The princess remains peaceful, enjoying her tea while the silent watcher remains hidden among the trees.
He reflects on the impossibility of their relationship, knowing their fates are destined to stay separate.
News of the seventh princess's upcoming political marriage to a distant kingdom begins to spread.
He listens to the cold assessment that she is merely being sold off by her family.
He grips his sword with newfound determination, refusing to accept the grim future planned for her.
A dark cloud of destiny looms over his thoughts as his internal rebellion takes root. He decides that he would rather destroy the world than let her be taken away.
The palace burns as the man successfully leads a rebellion to overthrow the imperial family.
He gazes at the destruction, satisfied that the long-awaited moment of his triumph has arrived. Having claimed the throne, the new emperor stands tall amidst the falling petals of a ruined empire.
He reflects on the singular, desperate thought that drove him to commit such violent treason.
A massive red crystal, the Philosopher's Stone, pulses with light in the center of the room.
He sits in the darkened hall, cradling the silent and motionless form of the princess.
A soldier enters the chamber and addresses the new emperor with the respect due to his rank.
The attendant expresses concern that the emperor has not eaten in the 4 days since the coup.
He warns that the dead cannot be returned to life and urges him to face reality.
The emperor questions if the stone meant for miracles is unable to grant his one wish. He commands his subordinate to bring Rosanite and execute her to obtain the necessary imperial blood.
The soldier hesitates, reminding him that the eighth princess is the only other royal still alive.
The emperor dismisses the concern, questioning why he should care about keeping any of them alive.
He stares down at the fallen Eve, noting that her death has rendered everything else meaningless.
He declares that both the Empire and the Philosopher's Stone have lost their purpose to him.
The subordinate interrupts the heavy silence to announce the arrival of the Sage of the Spruce Forest.
A masked figure in dark robes enters the room to meet with the grieving emperor. The emperor asks the sage directly if there is truly a way to bring Eve back.
The sage warns that anyone resurrected through magic would only be a shell without a soul.
The emperor grows impatient, accusing the sage of wasting his time with common excuses and limitations. The masked figure clarifies that he is suggesting a far more radical and different approach. A glowing clock face appears as the sage proposes the idea of turning back time itself. The emperor listens with intense focus, asking if such a miraculous feat is actually possible.
The sage confirms it is possible, but notes the heavy price of half the Philosopher's Stone.
He tenderly touches the princess's face and whispers her name as he reaches his decision.
The emperor dismisses the cost, stating that no price is too high to save her life.
The sage accepts the command and prepares to initiate the complex and powerful magical process.
They stand together before the glowing crystal and the princess's resting place as the ritual begins.
The masked figure pauses to mention one final critical detail about the regression they are starting. The sage explains that the princess, not the emperor, will be the central axis of time. The emperor reacts with shock as he realizes the implications of the sage's final warning. The scene dissolves into light as the past and present merge in a blinding magical surge. He accepts that although he will not be able to meet her, she will live again. Michaelis cradles the lifeless princess, hoping that she will be able to meet him again. The sage of the Spruce Forest confirms that the emperor's wish for regression will be granted. Michaelis wonders if Eve will not choose him again or if he will face frustration. He fearfully questions if the princess will make the wrong choice yet again in the past. A gloved hand tenderly touches the sleeping princess's face during the final moments of time. Standing over her, the emperor declares that the outcome of his choice does not matter.
Magical symbols glow as the sage declares the ritual for time regression shall finally commence. The sage reads from a book before a massive pulsing red crystal during the magical ritual.
Memories of the emperor and princess are enveloped in a surging, blinding white magical light.
Michaelis calls out Eve's name as his physical form dissolves into the blinding magical light.
The Emperor gives Eve a final farewell kiss as the world begins to reset. A blurry memory of Michaelis kneeling over Eve remains as time begins to rewind.
Night falls over the palace gardens as footsteps approach the seated princess in the past.
A voice addresses the princess, though only the final syllable of her title is initially heard.
Rosanite smiles and explains she has arrived specifically to help the princess in her cell.
The red-eyed princess asks with dark delight if her sister has finally passed away now.
Eve's inner voice cries out to Rosie, questioning why she committed such a cold betrayal.
Looking at the bottle, the princess wonders if this outcome was Rosie's goal all along. Eve notes she was the last royal chosen by Michaelis and wonders why this happened.
Michaelis tells Eve she should have chosen him while she realizes his hidden backup plan.
Eve reflects that the possessive Rosanite would never have allowed her to keep his loyalty. Rosanite drops the small ornate poison bottle as she prepares to leave Eve alone.
Eve consumes the lethal poison provided by her sister to ensure a quick, painless death. Serene blue water is illuminated by sunbeams from above as Eve sinks into the depths.
A single gasp of "ah" escapes the princess's lips as she reaches out while drowning.
Eve falls through the dark ocean of her memories, questioning where her life went wrong.
She recalls the downfall of her father and Bridget's coronation as her own life fades. Sinking into the depths, Eve wonders if things would be different if she were crown princess. Visions of the burning imperial palace haunt Eve's thoughts as she ponders the empire's destruction. Eve reflects that being crown princess might have prevented the destruction of the imperial family. She looks back with deep regret for turning a blind eye to those needing help.
Waking up with a start, Eve gasps in shock at her sudden and impossible survival.
Eve gasps for breath in her bed, surrounded by the morning light of her room. Morning light fills the bedroom as the princess struggles to understand her sudden return to life. A soft exclamation escapes the princess's lips as she looks around her familiar, sunlit surroundings.
Eve touches her throat in disbelief, questioning how she can possibly still be alive now.
Looking around the large and ornate room, the princess asks herself where she is currently. Sitting on a sofa, the princess remembers definitely being locked up before her recent death. She recalls Rosanite's arrival as the start of the tragic events that led to poisoning. Eve remembers the poison bottle being presented to her as her only way to escape. Eve trembles as her terrifying memories conflict with the peaceful reality of her former bedroom. The princess stares forward, paralyzed by the realization that her surroundings are from her past. Eve asks herself why she is in a bedroom, specifically her old bedroom at that. She realizes this is not a dream or illusion because nothing has changed since before. Eve's slippers click against the wooden floor as she walks toward the large vanity mirror. The princess suddenly stops walking as a new and shocking realization begins to take hold. Looking into her vanity mirror, the princess utters a soft exclamation of shock at herself. Eve screams in horror, demanding to know why she looks so young in her reflection. Standing by a chair, the princess wonders if she has truly returned to the past. Chibi Eve clutches her head, wondering if her regrets in her cell drove her mad. Eve clutches her head, struggling to comprehend the reality of her sudden time regression. The sage explains that one must be a sage or like his teacher to sense magic. Chibi Eve holds her head, expressing a desperate desire to consult her currently absent teacher. Eve exhales a long breath, touching her throat as she begins to settle her thoughts. The princess resolves to calm herself and carefully analyze the situation before taking any action. Eve examines her room and youthful appearance, concluding she has returned to age 20. The princess stares intensely as she begins calculating the timeline of her past life. Eve recalls a vision of Princess Bridget before she was crowned as the official crown princess. Memories show the time before the rebellion leader, Michaelis Agneto, and the traitorous Rosanite met. Eve observes a vision of the influential figures standing together before the Empire's tragic downfall. Eve grips her hands tightly, determined to change the outcome of her fate this time. The princess stares forward with resolve, certain she can navigate the upcoming political turmoil. A pulsing white circle highlights Eve's internal vow to protect everyone in this new life. Eve envisions herself as the crown princess, wearing a crown and holding a royal scepter. Sidella Arfel, Eve's headmaid, enters the room with a refreshing tray of tea. Sidella remarks on Eve looking young today, while the princess notes Sidella's youthful appearance too. Sidella attributes her youthful glow to a high-quality face mask she used the night before. Eve observes her maid's face, silently confirming that Sidella has indeed become much younger. The princess realizes she has returned and resolves to find the exact current date. Eve asks Sidella if there are any important upcoming events she needs to prepare for. A dark memory of Rosanite hugging Eve highlights the sisters' eventual and cruel betrayal. Eve calculates that if Rosanite is turning 20, she must currently be 21 years old. The princess confirms she has regressed 8 years and is once again 21.
Sidella confirms that the upcoming 20th birthdays of the royal children are highly special occasions.
An illustration depicts a princess knighting a soldier during the traditional imperial appointment ceremony.
Sidella describes the ceremony as the flower of imperial events and a special soul-sworn relationship.
Sidella notes many homunculi are lining up to serve Rosanite, the Empire's white rose.
Eve drinks her tea while reflecting that Rosanite's nature is more like poisonous belladonna.
Sidella reveals that a candidate has already been selected for Rosanite's upcoming appointment ceremony.
The princess reacts with surprise, asking who has been chosen for her sister's knight position.
Sidella asks if Eve remembers the silver-haired Sylvestian Millard being chosen as the 8th princess's knight.
Eve reflects that Sylvestian Millard perfectly matches the public image of Rosanite as the white rose.
Narrative text highlights Sylvestian Millard's unique silver hair and his exceptional talents in combat. Eve reflects on the cold imperial view that homunculi are merely ornaments for royalty.
A vision shows Rosanite with Michaelis, the black-haired knight who will eventually help her.
Eve considers how much better the future would be if Rosie had truly chosen Mikhail.
Mikhail is shown in a vision, likely approaching Rosie to initiate their future rebellion.
The narrative notes that Mikhail probably approached Rosie specifically to facilitate his planned rebellion. Mikhail used Rosie as a political stepping stone to become emperor and destroy the empire. Eve resolves that she must stop the empire's destruction in this second life. The princess decides she must separate Rosie and Mikhail to prevent the future coup.
Eve pauses her tea and asks Sidella if she is aware of a certain fact.
Sidella explains that many homunculi actually desire to offer their personal loyalty to Eve. Eve finds it impossible that homunculi would want to serve a powerless princess like her. Sidella insists it is true and that Eve possesses a great reputation among the homunculi. Eve laughs at the idea and promises she must really treat her loyal maid nicely. Chibi Eve playfully promises to procure a house, a title, and a great husband for Sidella. Sidella grows serious and suggests that Eve should also appoint a personal knight for herself. The maid immediately apologizes, knowing the princess typically dislikes the topic of appointing knights. Eve remains calm and assures her maid that discussing the topic of knights is all right. Eve apologizes to Sidella for her past stubbornness, but the maid remains deeply devoted to her.
Sidella is moved by the princess's kindness, while Eve reflects on the hardships her maid endured.
Memories show Eve's mother, a commoner alchemist who passed away when the princess was very young.
Eve recalls her mother's belief in valuing all conscious beings, a trait she eventually inherited herself. Following her mother's example, young Eve began to see homunculi as being no different from humans. The princess remembers advocating for the fair treatment of homunculi despite the potential for social backlash. Consequently, imperial officials began to ignore the princess and significantly reduced her personal living allowances. Eve feels a pang of guilt, wondering how much Sidella suffered while managing their meager expenses. A tragic memory reveals that Sidella was eventually forced out of the palace during Eve's confinement. Eve reaches out and firmly grasps Sidella's hands, signaling a profound shift in her resolve. The princess makes a solemn vow to provide her loyal maid with a much better life. With absolute determination, Eve reinforces her promise to change their future for the better. Sidella expresses her gratitude while noting that her own happiness is tied to the princess's well-being.
The maid reaffirms her loyalty, reminding Eve that they share the same fate within the palace.
Sidella smiles warmly, moved by the princess's sincere and unexpected display of heartfelt affection.
Eve is momentarily stunned by the maid's unwavering devotion as flower petals drift through the air. The two share a joyful moment together, celebrating their renewed bond and commitment to one another. Eve decides that she must live this new life more relaxingly than the tragic one before. The princess reminds herself that this regression is now her true and permanent reality. Eve reflects on Mikhail's current status, knowing he is still trapped in a distant floating prison. She decides that solving the problem of Mikhail's imprisonment is essential to preventing the future rebellion. To change her destiny, Eve determines that she must first seek an audience with her father.
The narrative explains the imperial laws regarding multiple marriages and the vast size of the royal family.
Due to these laws, the emperor has fathered 18 children, leading to intense competition for his attention. Groups of children are randomly selected to greet their father during the traditional morning ceremony. Eve contemplates the specific request she intends to make when she finally meets with the emperor. The princess asks Sidella if she is scheduled to attend the morning greeting ceremony later today. Sidella confirms the schedule while Eve dismisses any interest in seeing her troublesome younger twin brothers. The maid reveals that the 3rd and 8th princesses will also be attending the morning greeting.
Visuals show Bridget and Rosanite, the two sisters who will eventually play key roles in Eve's downfall.
Eve realizes with shock that today is the specific day she was caught in a trap. Bridget appears with a confident and calculating gaze as she prepares for the upcoming royal interaction. Eve recalls her former distress during the original greeting, where she felt out of place and defeated.
The emperor appears troubled and distant, signifying the moment the princess began to lose his favor.
Eve stares at her reflection, recognizing that this interaction was a major turning point in her past.
Bridget's smirk reveals her hidden malice as she recalls the success of her past political scheme.
The memory shows Eve standing alone before the massive palace doors, crushed by her father's disapproval.
Eve reflects on her past failure, noting how she completely fell out of her father's favor.
The princess decides that since she has returned, she must use this turning point to her advantage.
Sidella asks the princess for instructions on how to proceed with her preparations for the day.
The maid enthusiastically suggests that the princess should dress up to make a powerful visual impression.
Eve is startled by the suggestion, realizing that a change in appearance could shift the social dynamic. The princess looks at herself in the mirror, finally accepting the challenge to change her public image. Eve unties her hair, symbolizing her decision to break away from her past habits and reputation.
With newfound confidence, the princess declares that she will no longer be seen as an ugly duckling.
Eve selects a stunning red dress adorned with jewels to wear for the upcoming morning greeting.
Sidella begins styling Eve's hair, treating the upcoming event as a crucial political and social battle.
The maid contrasts Bridget's elegance and Rosanite's loveliness, setting the stage for the princess's transformation.
Sidella explains that the princess will be competing directly with her two sisters to gain social standing.
The maid seriously analyzes the need for a perfect balance of elegance and loveliness for the outfit. Eve tells Sidella she intends to avoid direct competition with her siblings for now. Eve focuses on political strength while Sidella plans to help her navigate high society. Eve declares her intent to work harder to eventually be named the crown princess. Sidella enthusiastically pledges her support while Eve thanks her for her devoted loyalty. The princess remains silent for a moment, deep in her own strategic thoughts.
Eve envisions Bridget's sophisticated braided hairstyle and Rosanite's youthful low pigtail look.
Sidella trusts Eve's hairstyle intuition as the princess prepares to outshine her sisters.
The princess reaches into a drawer and opens an ornate box containing jewelry. Eve commands her maid to finish her styling with the specific accessories she selected. Surveillance golems patrol the sunny palace gardens as the two women walk to court.
Dressed in a striking red gown, Eve walks confidently through the palace with Sidella.
Sidella urges the princess to hurry so they are not late for the ceremony. Eve explains that the delay was due to the careful preparation of her father's tea. The pair discuss the palace magic ban, which necessitates walking rather than using warps.
A figure in a pink dress watches from the shadows as Eve walks by.
The hidden observer begins to step forward onto the checkered marble of the hallway. A cheerful voice calls out to Eve, catching the princess's immediate attention. Eve stops in her tracks as her sister's voice rings through the corridor. The princess recognizes the voice immediately, and her expression shifts into one of wariness. Eve clenches the fabric of her dress as she prepares to face her past betrayer. The princess begins to turn around, bracing herself for the inevitable confrontation.
Rosanite appears, greeting her sister warmly while Eve's thoughts turn to their dark history.
Seeing her sister's smiling face, Eve is haunted by the memories of Rosie's treachery. Eve recalls how Rosie successfully manipulated everyone to get exactly what she wanted. Narrative text notes that Rosie had already secured the position of the new empress. Eve reflects on the cold reality that her sister killed her to eliminate competition. A dark vision shows a gleeful Rosanite asking if the princess has finally died. The traitorous sister thanks the dying Eve, mocking her for being so foolishly trusting. Returning to the present, Eve clenches her fist as her resolve against Rosie hardens. The princess stares at the girl who was once her executioner, labeling her the enemy. Eve glares at her sister, struggling to reconcile the past with this youthful facade.
Rosanite tilts her head with feigned innocence, asking Eve why she is acting strange.
The princess continues to observe her sister silently, analyzing her every movement and word. Eve forces a polite smile and compliments Rosanite's beauty to maintain their social appearance.
Rosie thanks her while Eve notices her sister's gaze wandering toward her own accessories.
Eve stands tall in her regalia, determined to maintain her new, powerful public image.
The sisters share a superficial laugh while the maid watches their interaction with confusion.
Eve's attention is suddenly drawn to a person standing quietly behind her younger sister.
The princess is surprised to see a silver-haired homunculus knight accompanying the 8th princess.
Eve notes the presence of a knight she doesn't recognize from her original life.
Rosanite introduces her escort, Sylvestian Millard, a homunculus knight from the prestigious Imperial Guard.
Eve remarks that Rosie chose a knight that perfectly matches her public white rose persona.
Sylvestian Millard bows deeply, offering his formal greetings to the 7th princess, Eve.
Eve remembers that in the future, Rosie will treat this loyal man like worthless dirt.
Vowing to change his fate, Eve acknowledges Millard's legendary skills in swordsmanship and magic.
The princess offers the knight a sincere wish that he finds a worthy, kind master.
Sir Millard is visibly stunned, staring at the princess in stunned and contemplative silence.
Eve blinks, wondering why the knight is looking at her with such intense, focused interest.
The knight eventually bows his head and asks for forgiveness for his momentary, silent rudeness.
Sir Millard smiles warmly, admitting he was deeply moved by the princess's surprisingly kind words.
Eve asks the silver-haired knight if he often receives such heartfelt and sincere compliments from others.
Sir Millard explains that members of the imperial line typically only show interest in his silver hair.
Rosenite flinches with annoyance as the knight continues explaining the shallow interests of the other royal family members.
Sir Millard bows his head while Rosenite observes him with a mixture of growing frustration and silent observation.
The knight and the pink-dressed princess stand together in the hallway as the social atmosphere grows increasingly awkward.
Eve and Sedella look forward with concern, the princess realizing that her interactions are deviating from the past.
Sedella urges Rosenite to hurry so they are not late for the upcoming royal morning greeting ceremony.
Rosenite turns her back to her sister, offering a curt and submissive response as she begins to walk.
The sisters walk toward the massive doors as they slowly creak open to reveal the royal dining hall.
A wide shot reveals several members of the royal family already seated around a long, ornate breakfast table.
Identification panels introduce the 4th Prince Levence, the 5th Prince Icarus, and the calculating 3rd Princess Bridget Hadalamid. Sedella whispers in shock, noting that all the royals have dressed exactly as the 7th Princess had predicted. Eve stares forward with intense focus, a single drop of sweat betraying her inner tension during this confrontation. The princess grits her teeth, steeling her resolve to face the siblings who once looked down upon her. Eve and Rosenite enter the room together, with Eve offering a polite greeting to her older sister and brothers. Princess Bridget remains seated, coolly acknowledging their arrival and gesturing for the 2 younger princesses to take seats.
Eve and Rosenite move to their respective chairs, the tension in the room palpable as the family gathers.
The twin princes greet Rosenite with exaggerated warmth, enthusiastically telling her how much they have missed her lately. One of the brothers compliments Rosenite, calling her the Empire's white rose and noting her stunning, colorful appearance. Rosenite blushes and giggles with feigned modesty, thanking her brother for his excessively kind and flattering words.
The prince continues his praise, claiming everything in the palace exists specifically to help Rosenite stand out as a flower.
He tells her to look around at her surroundings to appreciate how much everyone else compliments her beauty. Eve sits silently as her brother highlights her as merely part of the greenery that makes Rosenite look better. The princess looks on with a cold gaze, realizing her siblings view her as a mere accessory for Rosenite. A dark memory recalls a voice mocking Eve's lime-blonde hair, labeling its unique color as incomparably dingy.
The princes snicker in her memories, cruelly mocking the fact that Eve is not a legitimate imperial family member.
Eve remembers sitting alone and miserable in the past, wondering why she allowed herself to live so pathetically.
Returning to the present, the princess remains silent, though her posture and expression have significantly shifted from the past.
Narrative text notes that the other siblings seem to be enjoying themselves at the expense of the 7th princess. A powerful sound effect emphasizes Eve sitting tall and proud, signaling a dramatic change in her personal presence. Eve looks toward her siblings, no longer hiding her face in shame as she did in her previous life. The princess beams with a radiant and confident smile, catching the immediate and shocked attention of the twin princes. Levence and Icarus look at Eve with confusion, completely startled by her sudden and unexpected display of confidence. The 2 brothers whisper frantically to each other, questioning why their sister is acting so differently than she usually does. Eve smiles to herself, knowing that her different behavior is the first step in changing her future fate. The princess stares intensely, reflecting on the fact that her current goals are the only things that truly matter. Visuals focus on Bridget and Rosenite, the 2 sisters who represent the primary obstacles in Eve's path to power. The heavy doors at the end of the hall creak open once more, signaling a major new arrival. A tall, imposing figure in a fur-lined red cape enters the room as the servants bow in deep respect.
An official announces the arrival of His Majesty as the stern-faced emperor approaches the seated members of his family.
Eve looks up with a complex expression, facing the man who eventually abandoned her in her former life.
A simple narrative bubble highlights the princess's internal recognition of the man standing before her as her father. The emperor takes his place at the head of the table, his presence commanding absolute silence from his children. Emperor Desmond Dominic Callisto Hadalamid looks over the table and asks if they shall finally begin the morning ceremony. Eve speaks up immediately, explaining she has specially prepared tea and asking for his permission to brew it.
The emperor reacts with visible surprise, questioning why his daughter has gone through the effort of preparing tea herself.
Eve explains that tea brewing is a long-time hobby and she is highly confident in the scent and taste. The emperor considers the request for a moment before admitting there is no logical reason for him to refuse.
Sedella carefully pours the freshly brewed tea into a cup for the emperor as the other siblings watch intently.
The emperor takes a sip of the tea and admits that the scent is surprisingly good and quite refreshing.
A cup of rooibos tea mixed with lemon balm is noted for curing headaches.
The emperor drinks the tea and questions its ability to cure his recurring headaches. Eve explains that she prepared the specialized blend after noticing his recent physical discomfort.
The Emperor admits to suffering from headaches and expresses his appreciation for her consideration. Eve hopes the tea satisfies him, mentioning she prepared it meticulously over the past week.
The Emperor praises the amazing tea, feeling an immediate reduction in his current headache. Luvence notes her surprising talent, having thought she only practiced alchemy in her room. Eve explains to her brother that the art of tea blending is similar to alchemy.
An illustration depicts the detailed process of gathering, refining, and blending ingredients with precision.
Eve attributes her success to inheriting her father's brilliant and well-known alchemy skills.
The Emperor laughs, clearly pleased and flattered by her acknowledgement of his own talents.
Bridget clenches her jaw in silent resentment as the Emperor sees himself in Eve. Eve humbly deflects the praise back to her father and her more skilled older sister.
The Emperor chuckles and teases Eve, asking if she is actually afraid of Bridget.
Bridget remains silent and cold while watching her siblings interact with their father.
Bridget forces a polite smile, claiming she is very pleased to have such a smart sister.
Luvence mentions that it will soon be Rosanite's birthday and her upcoming knight selection.
The family discusses the significance of the upcoming ceremony for the Empire's youngest princess.
Rosanite acts bashful and worried, expressing her sudden insecurities about the upcoming selection ceremony.
Over a luxury setting details her feigned lack of confidence in her imprinting abilities.
The Emperor reassures Rosanite that every member of the Imperial family can successfully imprint. A humorous panel shows Rosanite fake crying while the Emperor continues to laugh and comfort her.
Rosanite steals a glance at Eve, maintaining her innocent facade while monitoring her sister's reaction. Eve remains composed and silent, sipping her tea while observing her sister's manipulative behavior.
A heavy, intense silence descends upon the dining room table following the exchange.
Eve thanks Rosanite for her input while the younger sister sneakers behind her hand.
The Emperor remains skeptical of Eve, noting her history of being extremely skilled but stubborn.
The Emperor dismisses her attempts to speak, comparing her stubborn nature to her mother's.
Eve places her cup down firmly, loudly interrupting her father to correct his current assumptions.
The Emperor stops mid-sentence, looking toward his daughter with a mixture of shock and curiosity.
Eve stares back with an intense and determined gaze, showing no fear of her father.
The princess admits to her past narrow-mindedness and regrets causing her father unnecessary worry.
Eve stands up abruptly, her sudden movement drawing the attention of everyone at the table.
Dressed in a vibrant red gown, the princess commands the room with her newfound presence.
A detailed view focuses on the elegant white lace and crimson shoes of her royal outfit. Her siblings react with profound shock to Eve's dramatic transformation and her confident behavior.
The Emperor asks for confirmation of her words while Eve reaffirms her resolve to change.
The Emperor laughs joyfully at her maturity and invites her to sit closer for conversation.
Rosanite looks on with visible concern, realizing the social situation is no longer in her favor.
Eve requests permission to hold a simple knight selection ceremony immediately following the morning greeting.
The Emperor questions if his daughter already has a specific homunculus in mind for selection.
Eve confirms she has selected a candidate, sitting with a poised and regal posture.
The princess shocks the table by naming the legendary monster of the floating prison.
Heavy iron chains appear against a dark background, framing the name Michaelis Igninam.
A black-haired man sits heavily bound and gagged in a dark, oppressive stone prison cell.
The title of the monster held in the floating prison is displayed over ominous chains. The name Michaelis Ignido is shown again over the image of the captive, bloodied man. The entire dining hall falls into a stunned silence as Eve's request echoes through the room.
The Emperor stares at his daughter with a speechless and intensely troubled expression.
Luvence jumps to his feet, shouting in disbelief at the princess's incredibly dangerous proposal.
The narrative explains that the man was imprisoned because he refused to show his loyalty.
Prince Luvence stands up, shocked that Eve wants to imprint on the monster his father failed to tame.
Eve asks her brother to clarify what he meant by stating that their father had failed.
The Emperor explains that the homunculus in question possesses a fundamental problem within its own nature. Luvence quickly apologizes to his father for his outburst while acknowledging the Emperor's assessment of the situation.
The Emperor warns Eve that the man is dangerous because he has never taken an oath of loyalty. Eve listens intently, her expression hardening as she considers the weight of her father's warning.
An illustration depicts the symbolic act of a princess granting a title to a kneeling loyal knight.
Narrative text explains that a normal homunculus would be discarded if it ever broke its oath of loyalty. Due to his exceptional abilities, the man was sentenced to public prison instead of being immediately destroyed. Michaelis Ignido remains bound in chains before an imperial crest, a testament to his continued defiance. The Emperor gazes downward, contemplating the political risks associated with his daughter's highly unusual request.
Text highlights that attempting to control such a being could be seen as challenging the imperial throne.
Eve asks her father to confirm if homunculi are only truly born through taking a loyalty oath. Eve calls it pitiful that he refused the oath, while the Emperor notes consciousness only hinders a homunculus.
The princess touches her cheek, openly wondering if the legendary monster actually turned her father's offer down.
Eve questions how a homunculus could reject the Emperor unless there's a flaw in its mana circuit. Looking at the captive man, Eve vows to solve the problem and force him to swear an oath.
Eve declares that she will succeed by using the specific talents she inherited from her father. The princess looks directly at the Emperor and formally requests permission to resolve the issues with the homunculus.
The Emperor taps his finger on the table, signaling his deep thought regarding his daughter's bold proposal.
Eve awaits a response, her breath hitching as she prepares for either a rejection or a challenge.
The Emperor stares sternly at his daughter and declares that he will grant permission under one condition. In a snowy field, Eve offers to use warming magic to help Sidella cope with the freezing cold.
The princess and her maid trudge through the heavy blizzard toward a secret and remote imperial location.
Narrative text reveals that this facility is located in a polar region and hidden from official maps.
A vast frozen fortress serves as the Empire's primary training center for the production of new homunculi.
The text explains the rigorous 15-year process of creating, educating, and testing homunculi for imperial service.
Only those who receive the highest grades are permitted to serve as imperial guards or direct royal knights. The narrative notes that even advanced homunculi are viewed as consumables, while lower ranks perform menial labor.
Eve reflects on the harsh system, finding it strange that the oppressed homunculi have never attempted a rebellion.
A man in a heavy coat greets the princess, stating he has been waiting for her arrival. The snowy wind howls as the official offers his formal respects to the 7th princess of the Empire.
The man introduces himself as Baron Pete Urka, the general manager in charge of the training facility.
Eve acknowledges Urka's hard work, while he offers to personally escort her to the floating prison.
Baron Urka leads Eve and her companions through a cavernous tunnel lit by glowing magical lamps.
The group walks deeper into the rocky depths, the sounds of their footsteps echoing against the stone walls.
Eve observes the knight's dark hair and asks if most of the homunculi they see share that trait. Visuals show that homunculi in the training center actually possess very light, almost white hair colors.
Urka explains that mana collars lighten hair, but the natural dark color returns once the collar is removed.
A portrait of Sylvestian Millard appears, illustrating why his long silver hair makes him so popular. The Baron admits that he only learned about the hair color transformation after he began working at the center.
Urka compares the transformation to an insect's metamorphosis, much to Eve's visible and vocal annoyance. The manager notes that since the prisoner still wears a collar, Eve must want to see his hair.
They reach a stone archway that reveals a massive, dark pit containing the suspended cage of the prisoner. Eve and Sidella look up in awe and trepidation at the sheer scale of the oppressive floating prison.
The party steps onto a circular, magical platform that serves as an elevator into the depths of the pit.
Snowflakes drift into the abyss as the platform descends slowly toward the level of the iron-barred cell.
From within the shadows of the cage, the captive watches as the princess and her escort approach him.
Eve stares forward with unwavering resolve, finally face to face with the man she intends to make her knight.
A captive man with pink hair kneels in chains, labeled as a doll due to his unique appearance.
Princess Eve watches the prisoner with a focused and slightly nervous expression.
The princess thinks of the man's name as she stares at his bound form through the bars.
Eve is visibly disturbed by the degrading state of the legendary man she once knew.
The prisoner suddenly snaps his vibrant purple eyes open, noticing his visitor.
Eve and the captive lock eyes in a tense moment of mutual recognition.
Baron Urka shouts at the prisoner, reprimanding him for his disrespectful posture toward the princess. The man questions why a princess would bother visiting a place as desolate as his cell. He is shocked to realize his visitor is an actual member of the imperial family.
Urka continues to insult the man until Eve firmly commands the official to stop his verbal abuse.
The princess steps forward, approaching the entrance of the heavy iron cage. Eve orders Baron Urka and Sidella to stay back, intending to enter the cell alone.
With a cold and authoritative gaze, Eve repeats her demand for her companions to back off. Startled by her intensity, Urka and Sidella obey and move away from the princess.
Eve stares ahead with unwavering resolve, preparing to confront the man inside.
A view of the prisoner's shackled feet emphasizes that the power dynamic between them has completely shifted.
Eve stands before the man and declares she has come specifically to find him. The princess notes how miserable the man looks compared to his former glory.
A memory depicts a past where Eve sat dejectedly while a dark-haired Mikhail stood tall before her.
Eve reflects on a previous life where Mikhail was the only person who showed her kindness. The princess notes that his current hostile gaze is nothing like the one she remembers from the past. In her memories, Mikhail once told Eve she should have chosen him instead of her former allies. Eve looks back on the memory of the man calling her name with deep familiarity.
Narrative text reaffirms that the princess is in the prison specifically to choose him now.
A split panel identifies the captive man by his full name, Michaelis Agneto. Chibi characters appear as a brief narrative interlude before the conversation continues.
The scene remains focused on Eve's singular goal of choosing Mikhail for her own. Eve stands in the center of the dark cell facing the bound man directly.
The princess prepares to address the knight, reaching out as she begins her proposal.
Michaelis struggles against his chains, his focus fixed entirely on the woman before him.
Mana flickers around the man's shackles as he reacts to the princess's presence.
Michaelis asks the princess what she hopes to achieve by visiting a captive like him.
The princess introduces herself formally as Even Rose Hadelamid, the 7th member of the imperial line.
Michaelis questions her motives, recalling rumors that she previously refused to have any knight.
Eve explains that she now requires a personal knight to strengthen her standing within the palace.
The man scoffs, telling her to find a different homunculus if she just wants to summon it.
Eve looks at him with intensity, clarifying that she is not there to find a servant.
Michaelis warns her to stop playing with words, claiming she only wants to make him a slave. The prisoner cynically groups Eve with the rest of her cruel and manipulative family members.
Michaelis admits to feeling a sense of disappointment, believing Eve is just like every other royal.
Eve takes a firm step toward him, refusing to let his bitterness deter her.
The princess declares she did not come to find a slave or to treat him poorly.
Eve insists that she wants no one else but him to serve as her personal knight.
Addressing him by his full name, Eve reaffirms her absolute desire to choose Michaelis Agneto.
Startled by her specific and intense interest, Michaelis asks her why she chose him.
Eve admits she cannot reveal her full reasons until he officially accepts his new role.
A vision of a golden sword represents her promise to treat him with respect and dignity.
Michaelis remains skeptical, arguing that the loyalty oath will make her promises irrelevant. Eve apologizes for the difficulty of the situation and asks him to have faith in her.
Michaelis looks away with a troubled expression, questioning why he should ever trust a princess.
Eve reaches out, formally asking the captive Mikhail to serve as her personal knight.
The white-haired man stares back with an expression of profound shock and lingering disbelief. He tells himself to wake up, unable to believe a royal is choosing him.
A memory shows palace guards rushing to help the emperor after a violent confrontation.
In the past, Mikhail stood defiantly before his captors, refusing to submit his loyalty.
The emperor sneered at the captive man, labeling him ugly for his continued stubbornness. The emperor struck Mikhail across the face, demanding total obedience to his imperial orders.
Despite the physical assault, Mikhail remained silent while the emperor struggled to catch his breath.
Furious at the rejection, the emperor ordered that the prisoner be sent to the floating prison.
Bound in magical chains, Mikhail was left to rot in the cold, desolate darkness. Even in solitary confinement, the man maintained his defiance, refusing to take the oath.
Returning to the present, Eve offers to take him away from his miserable cell.
Mikhail remains silent as he processes the princess's unexpected and seemingly genuine offer of freedom.
He admits all royals seem identical, but accepts if it is his only escape.
Clenching his fist, he decides that even being her servant is better than this cage. Mikhail bows his head, officially agreeing to become the 7th princess's personal imperial knight.
Eve looks on with relief while Mikhail prepares himself for the weight of her magic. The two stand close together in the center of the dark and oppressive stone cell.
Mikhail clarifies that his past refusal wasn't entirely of his own will. Eve agrees.
He warns her that a failed imprint will result in her immediate and painful death.
The princess reacts with wide-eyed surprise at the severity of the danger he describes.
Eve thanks him for his concern, though Mikhail quickly denies caring for her safety.
A powerful surge of magical energy erupts, signaling the start of the royal imprinting ceremony.
Concentrating through the strain, Eve admits that the magical connection is far from easy.
Mikhail asks if she can endure the pressure while the princess confirms her continued resolve.
He tries to protest as the mana intensifies, fearing she cannot handle the power flow. Eve tells him to stop talking and instead provide the silent support she needs now.
Mikhail shouts that she's being incredibly reckless by performing such a dangerous ritual here.
Despite the rising tension and glowing mana, Eve maintains a calm and reassuring smile.
A memory recalls the emperor stating that his permission came with one heavy, non-negotiable condition.
He warned her that if she failed to successfully imprint the dangerous man before her, the emperor commanded that she must personally execute the prisoner with her own hands. Remembering the threat, Eve's gaze hardens with an absolute and unwavering determination to succeed. She tells herself that she must obtain him as her knight, regardless of the cost.
A butterfly-shaped hair ornament suddenly shatters, releasing a cascade of bright red crystalline shards. Mikhail watches in awe as the fragments swirl around him, realizing the jewels weren't ordinary.
Eve reveals that the shards are actually pieces of a legendary and extremely powerful philosopher's stone.
The man is stunned to realize the princess used such precious treasures for his sake. Mikhail asks if the stones in her hair were also part of the legendary treasure.
Before leaving, Eve had instructed Sidella to prepare her hair using these specific red ornaments.
Her maid questioned using the heirlooms left behind by the deceased sixth princess.
Eve insisted on using the jewels, seeking to borrow her late mother's strength and protection. In the present, she silently pleads for her mother to aid her in this transition.
Mikhail stares at her with a softened expression, wondering if he truly deserves her sacrifice.
Eve reaffirms that he deserves it all, stating she must have him by her side.
A brilliant explosion of golden light fills the entire cell, completing the deep spiritual bond.
As the glow fades, the two share a quiet moment of mutual and profound connection.
Eve tentatively asks if the imprinting was successful while Mikhail looks on with dazed eyes. A sudden, booming crash echoes through the chamber, interrupting the aftermath of their ritual.
The heavy cage lurches violently, sending the princess and her new knight toward the edge.
Eve reacts with intense shock as the cage suddenly lurches, her hand reaching out in alarm.
A colorful graphic featuring chibi versions of the characters serves as a promotional interlude for the readers.
The princess closes her eyes tightly, gripped by fear as she realizes she is falling through space. Eve's panic subsides as she is caught securely by the dark-haired prisoner within the falling cage.
Michaelis stares down at her with a calm, dark gaze, his expression unreadable as he holds her.
The princess looks at him with realization, noting that the imprinting ritual has fully restored his mana.
Michaelis stands up and tells Eve she should be fine now while she stares at him, stunned. Flustered and embarrassed, Eve quickly runs away from the man to put some distance between them.
Blushing deeply, the princess reflects on the fact that such a sudden physical encounter is a first.
Michaelis looks at his own hand, calmly assessing that the imprinting process appears to have been successful.
Eve shouts in surprise while Mikhail admits to feeling a strange sensation following their newfound magical connection.
The man explains that when he pushed her, his body reacted instinctively due to the imprinting bond.
Mikhail asks if she is okay, and the princess bashfully confirms her safety while touching her head.
Mikhail reflects that his situation is worse than slavery because he must worry about his master's safety.
Eve looks at him with wide eyes, questioning if he truly considers her to be his owner.
Michaelis looks back at her with a dry expression, wondering why she is asking about the obvious.
Kneeling on the floor, Eve thanks her late mother for successfully making Mikhail her personal imperial knight. Eve claims she is just tired while thinking that imprinting a conscious subject was unexpectedly difficult work.
Chibi versions of the characters appear as Mikhail observes that humans are reportedly weaker than his kind.
Reaching out to shake hands, Eve asks Sir Agneto to take care of her in the future.
Now in a white floral gown, Eve carries a box of gold coins earned from her success.
The princess reflects on her father's positive reaction, noting he even assigned more servants to her palace.
Eve suddenly stops in a hallway, her attention caught by someone approaching from the distance ahead.
A tall, silver-haired knight in a red uniform appears, his presence drawing an immediate reaction from Eve.
Sir Millard bows respectfully to the seventh princess, who asks if he is returning from Princess Rosie.
The silver-haired knight confirms his task while looking toward Eve as she holds her heavy wooden box.
Sylvestian Millard mentions that he has just returned from visiting the Empire's Homunculus Training Center.
A close-up view focuses on the knight's face as he mentions his recent trip to the center.
Focusing on their feet, Sylvestian asks the princess to reveal which candidate she finally chose for herself.
Eve smiles gently at the knight and asks if he is familiar with the name Michaelis Agneto.
Sir Millard repeats the name while staring at the princess with a look of dawning realization.
The knight asks if she means the legendary monster currently held within the floating prison's deep darkness.
Looking away, the silver-haired man seems about to voice a concern regarding her dangerous and unusual choice.
Eve looks at him with a questioning expression as the knight suddenly cuts his own sentence short. A close-up reveals a bead of sweat on the knight's face as he remains silent and tense.
Sylvestian Millard offers his formal congratulations on her imprinting success and abruptly decides to take his leave.
Eve thanks the knight while looking confused by his sudden departure and strange, somber mood.
The two walk away from each other through the long, sunlit corridor of the Grand Imperial Palace.
As she stands alone, the princess wonders to herself what could possibly be wrong with Sir Millard.
Eve enters her chambers and announces her return as she walks toward a screen in the room.
Her maid greets the princess warmly, informing her that she has arrived at a very opportune time.
The maid calls for Sir Agneto to step out as the princess watches the screen with interest.
Michaelis steps forward, fully dressed in a sharp purple and black imperial uniform, looking incredibly regal.
Eve stares at him in dazed silence, realizing exactly why her sister Rosenite wanted him so badly. Michaelis leans toward her, asking if his appearance looks strange or if something is wrong with him.
Startled by his proximity, Eve insists he looks perfectly well while privately noting he surprised her greatly.
Eve notices his missing weapon and promises to bring him a suitable sword as soon as possible.
Mikhail explains that a uniform and sword should have been provided together upon his successful imprinting ritual.
The princess looks troubled, realizing the palace staff intentionally ignored the standard procedure for her new knight.
Narrative text explains that the imperial family views their personal knights merely as competitive fashion adornments.
Eve realizes that the palace staff intentionally slighted her by not providing a quality weapon.
Michaelis expresses his complete indifference regarding the poor quality of his newly assigned imperial sword. The princess notes that the man possesses an unnerving familiarity with the layout of the palace.
It is noted that homunculi undergo extensive education until they master every required imperial skill.
Michaelis confirms he was thoroughly trained in palace etiquette and serving the various imperial family members.
Eve suddenly wonders if his training included providing more intimate forms of service at night.
Feeling flustered by her own thoughts, Eve decides to abruptly change the topic of their conversation.
The princess invites Michaelis to sit down so they can continue their discussion over tea. The two characters transition toward the seating area to begin their formal tea time together.
Eve feels relieved that the man is cooperating and aims to build rapport as quickly as possible.
The princess reminds herself that the imprinting bond is temporary before he eventually leads his kind.
Eve anticipates that the man will inevitably find a way to break her current magical hold. She resolves to build a genuine relationship to prevent a future rebellion against her family. Eve informs her maid Sidella that she intends to personally serve the tea to her knight.
While preparing the drink, Eve recalls sharing tea with a man in a former life.
She remembers a past encounter where he quickly left her to attend to her sister, Rosanite.
The princess worries whether her specific tea preparation will meet the knight's personal tastes.
Michaelis accepts the drink and offers a compliment regarding the tea's pleasant fragrance and color.
The knight notes that the tea's color bears a striking resemblance to the princess's own eyes.
Startled by the unexpected and personal compliment, Eve stares back at him with wide, blushing eyes.
Michaelis asks if he has caused her discomfort while she stammers through her visible embarrassment.
In a memory, the man politely excuses himself to go visit the 8th princess instead. The past version of Eve resignedly bids him farewell as he leaves to serve her sister. Returning to the present, Eve tells herself it is far too late to dwell on the past.
The princess asks the knight for his honest feelings regarding his new placement within her palace.
Eve stands before her open window, looking out as the bright sunlight fills her grand room.
Looking toward her knight, Eve maintains a gentle and hopeful expression as she awaits his reply.
Michaelis sits with perfect discipline on the sofa, maintaining the formal posture of a dedicated knight.
The man notes that many things in their surroundings remind him of the princess's hair color.
A focused view highlights the princess's long golden hair as it falls over her ornate dress.
Eve quickly corrects him, insisting that her hair is a specific shade of lime blonde.
The knight calmly nods his head, acknowledging the princess's specific clarification regarding her hair color.
Eve prepares to make a serious point about the finality of their new magical connection.
Michaelis offers another sincere compliment, stating that he still finds her hair to be very beautiful.
A brief promotional interlude features a stylized character wearing a mask over their face. The knight's words repeat in her mind as the princess stares at him in dazed silence. Speechless and flustered by his charm, Eve struggles to find a proper response to his praise.
Eve suggests visiting the garden together, while Michaelis implies that beauty exists beyond the scenery.
Looking at her intently, Michaelis explicitly links his definition of beauty back to her hair.
Eve remains stunned by his boldness, while the knight appears confused by her sudden frozen reaction.
The two question each other's odd behavior as the atmosphere between them becomes increasingly tense.
In a brief chibi interlude, Eve asks why he spoke if he truly hates her family.
Eve points out the contradiction of his service since she is a prominent imperial family member.
Michaelis looks away in silence, appearing to grapple with his own conflicting and complicated emotions.
The man admits to hating his own thoughts and doesn't understand why he is speaking this way.
They discuss whether his confusion and waning hostility are being caused by the magical imprinting ritual. Eve confirms that the imprinting magic is likely the cause of his sudden change in attitude.
Michaelis admits that constantly fighting against his owner will eventually lead to him becoming tired.
He confesses a deep fear of losing his true self and becoming genuinely loyal to her.
Laughing off his concerns, Eve assures the man that such a complete transformation will never happen.
Michaelis admits he is afraid he will eventually become loyal to the royal family unwillingly.
Eve laughs off his concern, confident that such a transformation will never actually happen.
In a chibi interlude, Eve explains that his impolite speech is acceptable as long as they are alone. The princess allows the knight to speak freely even when her maid Sidella is present.
A beautifully prepared cup of red rose tea sits ready for the pair to enjoy.
The two sit in the grand room, maintaining a formal distance as they drink together.
Michaelis breaks the silence, addressing the princess as she takes a sip of her tea.
The knight reminds Eve that she promised to reveal her true motives for choosing him.
Eve asks if he is referring to the specific reason behind her choosing him specifically.
Michaelis asks the princess to finally tell him the truth now that he serves her.
Eve offers a gentle smile, confirming that it is indeed time to share her secrets. The princess declares her ambitious intention to eventually rise and become the official crown princess. Michaelis remains silent as he processes the weight of her grand and dangerous political ambition. A close-up of the knight reveals his profound shock at the princess's unexpected declaration.
Taking another sip of tea, Eve calmly clarifies that her ultimate goal is the Empress's throne.
The princess sets her cup down firmly as she prepares to reveal her most radical plan.
Looking him directly in the eyes, Eve reveals her true purpose, the complete liberation of homunculi.
The princess finishes her drink with a look of serene confidence following her shocking revelation. Startled and skeptical, Michaelis asks if she is truly serious about such a revolutionary goal.
In a chibi interlude, Eve tells the knight to look into her eyes for the truth.
Michaelis realizes she intends to use her personal night to prove her worth to high society. Eve agrees that her social status is just as vital as her political maneuvering for success.
The princess notes that without a strong presence, society would never choose an ugly duckling.
Michaelis looks away in thought, grappling with the complexity of the princess's dual-layered mission.
Eve mentions he must pass the loyalty oath this week to prepare for an upcoming event.
A vision of the 8th princess appears as Eve mentions Rosie's upcoming 20th birthday celebration.
The princess explains that the party is the perfect opportunity to debut him to high society. Eve asks Michaelis to keep her informed of any personal schedules he might have.
Michaelis stands up, stating that a knight's routine is to follow their master's every single step.
A memory illustrates how knights traditionally accompany the imperial family from dawn until late at night.
Narrative text explains that unselected candidates are normally housed in a separate building in the north.
Homunculus knights typically live together in the Imperial Guard headquarters under extremely strict and thorough management.
A view of a knight's uniform clarifies that personal knights occupy a basic rank by default.
Personal knights are exempt from daily roll calls because they must wait for their master's sleep. Michaelis reflects on the custom where homunculi are often expected to provide intimate service at night.
The knight looks visibly uncomfortable and begins to sweat as his mind wanders to improper thoughts. Noticing his strange reaction, Eve asks the flustered Michaelis what is bothering him so much. Looking toward the window, the princess casually mentions that the sun has already fully set.
Michaelis repeats the word evening with a look of dazed shock, fearing what comes next.
Eve begins to speak again, her expression soft and inviting in the dimming light of day.
A close-up view shows the knight's intense anxiety as he anticipates the princess's next request.
The princess offers a warm and gentle smile that only serves to increase the knight's confusion.
A dark and suggestive vision depicts a potential night inspection between the princess and her knight.
A promotional character graphic appears, humorously urging the reader to continue into the next chapter.
A colorful credit page provides information about the translators and the platform hosting the series.
Eve leans forward with a mysterious smile, beginning her next sentence with an expectant tone.
Michaelis swallows hard, internally questioning if the princess is actually going to demand night service.
To his immense surprise, Eve simply tells him to go back and rest until tomorrow morning.
Utterly bewildered by her dismissal, the knight can only stare at her and ask what she meant.
Eve tilts her head with a look of innocent curiosity, wondering why he is acting so odd.
Michaelis blushes while adjusting his glove, claiming he finally understands the princess's position.
Eve stares at her knight with a look of confusion, wondering about his thoughts.
After finishing their tea, the princess announces that she will be leaving him now.
The scene shifts to the hallway as the pair walks toward the royal throne room.
Standing by a doorway, the maid Sidella watches them depart with a knowing, gentle smile.
Michaelis wonders to himself what secret purpose or motive the princess might be harboring now.
A flashback details the rare few instances where Eve has personally served tea to others.
Narrative text clarifies that everyone who received her tea held the princess in high regard.
Michaelis notes that he is only the 4th person to ever receive such an honor.
Sidella explains to the knight that she simply wanted him to know her master's habits.
Closing his eyes, Michaelis promises the maid that he will remember her words well.
The two arrive at the grand throne room where the emperor waits on his throne. The emperor looks down at the new knight, calling him the monster of the prison.
Standing tall in his new uniform, Michaelis Agneto is formally presented to the imperial sovereign.
The emperor notes his past rebellion while Eve asks her father not to be angry.
Seated regally on his golden throne, the emperor demands to know the reason for refusal.
Eve explains that his mana circuit was broken, which she discovered and successfully repaired herself.
Looking down at the red carpet, the princess modestly claims she was simply very lucky.
The emperor repeats the word lucky with a skeptical expression, clearly doubting her humble explanation. Eve worries if her tone or explanation has somehow offended her powerful and intimidating father.
A thought bubble asks Eve what she is truly afraid of in this room.
The princess looks up in shock as the emperor poses a very direct and personal question.
The emperor laughs, questioning why she is so afraid to reveal her true talents and abilities.
Using a lion metaphor, Eve explains that she feels both fear and deep respect for him. Bowing her head, the princess asks how someone as low as her could not fear him.
The emperor is delighted, noting that his daughter is finally acting with proper royal eloquence.
Eve sighs with immense relief as she stands before the throne with her new knight.
The emperor notes the knight's impressive appearance, remarking how well the uniform suits the monster.
Eve quickly corrects her father, insisting he refer to the man as Sir Agneto from now. The emperor agrees with his daughter's assessment while looking down from his high golden throne. He explains that a final procedure is required before the man is officially recognized as royalty.
Bowing his head, Michaelis Agneto answers the Emperor's call with a calm and respectful tone.
The Emperor commands the knight to come forward and kneel before his Imperial Majesty immediately.
Looking at her knight with a worried gaze, Eve silently watches the start of the ritual.
Standing close behind him, Eve reaches out to offer her knight a moment of silent support.
A close-up highlights the knight's intense violet eyes as he faces the powerful seated monarch.
Eve watches the scene with focused concern, her eyes reflecting the gravity of the current moment.
Michaelis offers a subtle, confident smirk as he prepares to accept the Emperor's daunting royal trial.
Reassuring the princess, the knight tells her not to worry before he begins the formal process.
A wide view shows the knight dropping to one knee before the Emperor's massive golden throne.
The Emperor rolls up his sleeve, preparing to administer the magical oath to the kneeling man. He places his hand firmly on the knight's head to initiate the official loyalty binding ritual.
Speaking in the name of the Empire, the Emperor commands the knight to obey royal blood.
The binding magic glows as the Emperor orders that the knight must never harm royalty.
A focused view shows the knight's stoic expression as the powerful Geas takes root permanently.
Michaelis lowers his head and formally accepts the Emperor's absolute order to serve the crown.
The Emperor smirks with satisfaction, pleased that the legendary monster is now fully under control.
Looking down at the knight, the Emperor begins his next decree with a commanding, authoritative tone.
A close-up shows the knight's knee pressed firmly against the red carpet of the throne room.
Focusing on their feet, the scene captures the final moment of the knight's official imperial submission.
Princess Eve stares ahead with a look of mounting dread as the royal ritual continues. The Emperor commands the kneeling knight to submit by placing his head at his feet.
Michaelis Agneto maintains a stoic posture as he submits to the Emperor's humiliating and ancient command.
The knight clenches his jaw as the Emperor's magical pressure forces him into total, painful submission.
Maid Sidella remembers telling the knight that her master had only personally served tea to 4 people. Sidella realizes the depth of Eve's care and decides it is better to keep her observations quiet. The Emperor towers over the kneeling knight, asserting his absolute dominance over the Empire's legendary monster.
A close-up focuses on the Emperor's boots as they stand firmly before the knight's bowed head.
Michaelis stares ahead with cold intensity, acknowledging the crushing humiliation of kneeling at the monarch's feet. The princess watches the scene with wide, trembling eyes, horrified by the extreme level of subservience demanded.
Eve reflects on the cruel history of this degrading demand once forced upon slaves centuries ago.
The princess hesitates, fearing that interfering now would only make the entire situation worse for Michaelis.
A bead of sweat rolls down Eve's face as she struggles against her urge to speak.
Narrative text explains Eve's realization that her protection would only cause more detriment to her knight.
Eve silently speaks his name in her mind while looking at the back of her knight.
Michaelis lowers himself even further, showing no outward sign of the inner turmoil he must feel.
The Emperor demands more submission as the knight's head draws closer to the floor of the room.
Despite his calm face, the knight's gloved hand clenches the carpet tightly in a silent rage. The scene shifts to a peaceful, sun-drenched meadow where the two stand beneath a large tree. Michaelis stands in the shade of the tree, looking unreadable following the recent heavy royal trial.
Princess Eve approaches her personal knight and asks if he is doing all right after the ordeal.
The knight remains silent, seemingly lost in the complexity of the emotions he experienced during the submission.
The princess stares at him with a sad expression, her heart heavy from his public humiliation.
Eve notes that his reaction to the Emperor was fundamentally different from when she imprinted him.
Startled by his sudden change in mood, the princess looks at her knight with surprise. Michaelis confesses that, unlike his reaction to the Emperor, the princess's imprinting did not feel repulsive.
Eve is left stunned and speechless, her eyes widening at the knight's unexpected and honest confession.
The knight looks away while standing in the shadows, appearing troubled by his own confusing feelings.
Eve reaches out her hand, intending to bridge the emotional distance between her and her personal knight.
Seeking his consent, the princess asks if it is acceptable for her to personally touch him. Focusing on their feet, Michaelis reminds her that as his master, she does not need permission. Accepting his answer, the princess asks him to excuse her for a moment as she reaches out. Princess Eve reaches up and softly places her palm against the knight's forehead in a tender gesture. A close-up captures Eve's gentle expression as her hair flutters softly in the warm garden breeze.
Michaelis remains perfectly still, his violet eyes reflecting the warmth of the princess's hand on his face.
The moment of intimacy ends as Eve slowly withdraws her hand from the knight's bowed head. Eve tells Michaelis he did his best and held back his feelings well during the throne room.
The princess prepares to make a new and solemn promise as the sunlight filters through the leaves.
Eve vows to protect him so that he never has to endure such a humiliating trial again. A swirling visual effect represents the shifting of emotions and the strengthening bond between the two characters. Michaelis stares back at the princess with a look of dawning hope and deep personal loyalty. Eve offers a soft and genuine smile, reassured by her knight's calm and cooperative demeanor.
Looking toward the path, the princess suggests that it is finally time for them to head back.
Michaelis watches the princess walk away, his gaze lingering on her as the sunlight surrounds her form.
The knight touches his own forehead, appearing to savor the lingering warmth from the princess's recent touch.
Eve walks ahead through the golden meadow, her back to the knight as they leave the garden.
Thinking to himself, Michaelis agrees to go together with the princess as her truly loyal knight.
The scene transitions to a grand room where a group of nobles sits together for tea.
Marquise Chansley, an aide to Princess Bridget, asks if Her Highness heard about the 7th princess's success.
Silhouette figures of Eve and Mikhail appear as the nobles discuss the princess's new personal knight. A silhouette identifies the knight as the dangerous monster formerly held within the floating prison. Marquise Lemkool expresses surprise that a scholar like Princess Eve would suddenly acquire a personal knight. Viscount Fritz asks the Marquis if he noticed the princess acting unusual during today's gathering. The mention of the 7th princess causes a teacup to clatter loudly against its saucer. Both the Marquis and the Viscount flinch as the atmosphere at the table shifts suddenly.
Princess Bridget maintains a serene and confident smile while listening to her aide's nervous discussion.
The 3rd princess suspects Eve intends to join the competitive struggle for the imperial throne.
A subtle smirk crosses Bridget's face as she contemplates her sister's sudden change in behavior.
Bridget dismisses the threat, questioning what could possibly change regardless of Eve's new personal knight.
Marquise Lemkool observes that the 7th princess currently lacks any political support from the nobility. Sipping her tea, Bridget orders everyone to stop their useless worrying about her younger sister. Despite the command, Viscount Fritz admits to having a persistent bad feeling about the situation.
Bridget sharply repeats her order to cease while focusing on blueprints for more important matters.
The group remains at the table in the sunlit room as a red-clad aide departs.
The Viscount reflects on how rare it is for their strategist to become so visibly agitated. A mysterious knight wonders about the true identity of the man serving as Eve's personal protector.
The dark-haired man smirks while contemplating the rumors surrounding the 7th princess's new personal knight. Eve looks toward Michaelis as they prepare for the political challenges awaiting them in society.
Back in her office, Eve asks her head maid Sidella for her opinion on the new servants.
Sidella introduces Leanne, Peony, and Hugh, praising their exceptional sincerity as former employees of the Empress.
Eve trusts her maid's judgment and feels pleased that such capable servants have been sent.
The princess requests Sidella's assistance with several important matters located outside the palace grounds.
Eve instructs the maid to visit the blacksmith district to commission a custom sword for Michaelis.
In a memory, Eve asks for a small alchemy workshop that can accommodate 3 people.
Sidella accepts the instructions and asks if the princess has any further tasks to complete.
Eve takes a moment to think deeply about her next strategic move for their future.
The princess asks for help locating a suitable townhouse situated near the southern Ravello River.
A view of grand buildings illustrates Eve's plan to invest in real estate for future profit.
Eve laughs joyfully in her office, feeling satisfied as her various plans begin taking shape. The door shuts firmly as the maid departs to begin executing the princess's many requests.
Glowing documents on her desk represent the meticulous preparation Eve is undertaking for her goal.
Eve reflects on the necessity of gaining proper qualifications before she can fight for succession. Michaelis stands formally in the hallway while Eve considers the impact of their public appearance. Gold coins scatter across a table as Eve focuses on stabilizing her personal living conditions. Nodding to herself, the princess believes she has thoroughly covered every necessary base for now. Looking ahead with focus, Eve realizes that the greatest challenges still lie in the future. Narrative text notes that a certain candidate currently holds the top rank for imperial succession. Princess Bridget poses regally with her crown, embodying the power of the current frontrunner. Bridget stands before her powerful supporters, highlighting the formidable forces Eve must eventually match.
Eve understands she needs to find allies strong enough to challenge the 3rd princess's influence.
The princess decides she cannot afford to miss Princess Rosanite's upcoming birthday banquet celebration. Eve glances toward her notes, focusing on the social connections she must make very soon. With profiles of key noble women ready, Eve confirms that her banquet preparations are finally complete.
A tired Chibi Eve yawns as she waits for Sidella to return from her errands.
Eve wonders if Michaelis is still training and hopes he avoids any imperial family members.
The princess specifically worries about a chance meeting between her knight and the 8th princess, Rosie.
Eve ponders the potential consequences if Michaelis and Rosie had met before her own imprinting. A swirling visual represents Eve's internal questioning of whether her current anxiety is actually necessary. Powerful stabs impact a training post as the knight continues his relentless and focused practice. From behind, Michaelis is seen wielding his sword with impressive skill within the stone courtyard.
Michaelis begins his training in the courtyard while 2 other knights watch him from a distance.
Nearby knights gossip about the monster of the floating prison becoming the 7th princess's personal knight.
The knights suggest Michaelis would have avoided prison if he had simply obeyed the emperor originally.
Ignoring the whispers, Michaelis dashes forward to engage a massive training golem with his practice sword.
The knight swings his blade with terrifying speed and precision during his solo training session today.
A single, powerful strike from Michaelis impacts the center of the training golem's solid stone body.
The force of the blow resonates through the stone, creating a momentary shockwave of pure power.
Faint cracks spread across the golem's surface as it begins to yield to the knight's incredible strength.
With a final rumble, the training golem collapses into rubble behind the victorious and stoic knight.
The observing knights stare in silent disbelief at the overwhelming display of raw and destructive martial power.
Michaelis takes a seat on a wooden bench, exhaling a long breath after his intense exercise.
A hand reaches into view, offering a water bottle while praising the knight's exceptional sword skills.
A silver-haired man from the Imperial Guard stands before Michaelis, holding out the bottle of water. Michaelis accepts the water, thanking the stranger while noting the man's distinctively long and silver hair. The silver-haired man advises him to control his power since Eve must pay for broken golems.
Michaelis drinks the water, thanking the man for the warning about his princess's potential repair expenses.
Introducing himself as Michaelis Agnito, Eve's knight, he asks the silver-haired man for his own name.
The man is Sylvestian Millard from the Imperial Guard, the knight chosen by the 8th princess.
Sylvestian pauses for a moment, informing Michaelis that there is something specific he wishes to ask.
Standing tall, Sylvestian asks if the reports are true that homunculi change completely upon being imprinted.
Michaelis stares back at the guard, considering the deeper implications of the man's curiosity about imprinting.
Recalling his own imprinting, Michaelis confirms that one naturally puts their master first after the ceremony.
Sylvestian asks if he will truly become someone willing to risk everything for the 7th princess.
Looking down, the silver-haired guard suggests that such a total change might actually be for the best.
Sylvestian notes he favors another royal, but claims all Imperial family members are essentially the same.
Michaelis listens with a neutral expression, his gaze fixed on the skeptical guard from the Imperial Guard.
Sylvestian changes his tone, adding that the cynical outlook he just mentioned might not be true.
In a chibi interlude, Michaelis says he still hates things he hated before, confusing the guard.
Michaelis suggests it is better to have one's own mind, even if that independence is occasionally tortuous.
Sylvestian looks thoughtful, his expression softening as he processes Michaelis' perspective on maintaining his own will.
The silver-haired knight asks if Michaelis thinks the 7th princess could eventually choose to cast him away.
A split view highlights the intense eye contact between the two men as they discuss abandonment.
Sylvestian wonders if Eve will discard her knight, and Michaelis is momentarily shaken by the thought.
The two knights remain in the arena, the weight of the question lingering heavily between them both.
A focused view shows Michaelis' face as he processes the potential for betrayal by his new master.
Michaelis looks away, seemingly unsettled by the guard's blunt assessment of royal nature and future choices.
Sylvestian watches him closely, his silver hair catching the light as he waits for a deeper reaction. Admitting his question was rude, Sylvestian dismisses the idea of abandonment as an unnecessary thing to consider.
The silver-haired guard clarifies his stance, stating that he believes Princess Eve is simply not that kind of person.
Michaelis lowers his head and agrees, his posture relaxing as he finds common ground with the guard.
Sylvestian says he's interfered with training too much, but admits he genuinely enjoyed their long conversation. Michaelis reciprocates, noting it has been a long time since he could speak so well with someone.
Sylvestian suggests a future practice match, and the two knights finalize their meeting with a firm handshake.
As the sun sets, Michaelis walks away from the training area, his mind still racing with thoughts.
Thinking to himself, Michaelis reflects on how he momentarily lost his rationality during the conversation about abandonment.
He wonders why Sylvestian's warning about the princess casting him away felt so extremely and painfully reasonable. A beautiful vision of the 7th princess appears, highlighting her status as a member of the elite.
Michaelis pauses in the garden, standing beneath the trees as he grapples with his own rising internal conflict.
Clenching his hand, the knight wonders why he feels so angry and if the imprint is responsible.
Michaelis turns his head in surprise as Eve calls his name, her voice breaking his dark reverie.
Princess Eve waves a friendly greeting while someone calls out her title from the distance. Michaelis asks why she came herself, but Eve claims she was just out for a stroll.
Eve asks about palace life, and Michaelis notes it is peaceful since he stays at school.
Feeling a sense of relief, Princess Eve offers her knight a warm and genuine smile. The princess stares at her personal knight with a curious and slightly comical expression.
Standing among white blossoms, Eve tells Michaelis that she wants to show him something special.
A breathtaking indoor garden stands bathed in light, featuring ornate architecture and a grand chandelier.
Michaelis is mesmerized by the view, admitting he never imagined seeing such a beautiful place.
The knight's violet eyes reflect the lush greenery and soft light of the enchanted greenhouse. Michaelis observes the magical principles maintaining the garden's timeless environment while touching a delicate leaf.
Eve praises his incredible intuition, confirming the greenhouse is a masterpiece of combined magic and alchemy.
Admitting he is only an amateur at alchemy, Michaelis notes he can still sense the magic.
The knight observes that the magical structure and the flow of mana are exceptionally delicate.
Princess Eve suddenly stops, struck by the realization that homunculi are not supposed to use alchemy. Narrative text explains that despite their innate magical skill, homunculi seem to lack any alchemical talent. The historical record confirms that in reality, homunculi are completely unable to practice alchemy.
The Imperial Alchemy Association describes this limitation as a fundamental provision of nature's laws.
A celestial visual represents the concept of creation and the limitations placed upon artificial life.
Eve contemplates the fact that as artificial creations, homunculi are fundamentally unable to reproduce.
Eve questions how Rosie had his child, wondering if it involves prohibited imperial information.
The princess stares intensely at Michaelis, causing the knight to question her strange behavior.
Michaelis asks the princess what she is thinking about while wearing such a focused expression. Still lost in her, the knight blushes deeply, his eyes widening in total shock at the princess's unexpected words.
Eve panics and clarifies she was only thinking about how homunculi are unable to reproduce.
Struggling with her embarrassment, Eve nervously wonders if reproduction is truly impossible or just difficult.
Michaelis questions why she would choose to think about such a topic while staring at him.
Eve insists she was only looking because he was there and tells him not to worry.
Overwhelmed by her own social blunder, the princess blushes and hides her face in shame.
Michaelis remains silent and looks away, clearly unsettled and embarrassed by their awkward conversation.
Eve abruptly stands up and suggests they return, ordering Michaelis to lead the way immediately.
The knight obeys her command and turns away, though his expression remains noticeably flustered.
As she follows behind, Eve internally screams in regret over her humiliating and impulsive outburst.
The two walk away through the greenhouse, both still visibly embarrassed by their recent discussion.
Sunlight breaks through the drifting clouds above, signaling the passage of time over the palace.
The grand spires of the imperial palace stand tall and bright against the clear morning sky.
Eve collapses at her table, exhausted after enduring a long and grueling royal beauty regime.
Her maid offers snacks, noting that the 8th princess's selection ceremony is taking an unusually long time.
Resting her chin on her hand, Eve agrees that the process is taking much longer than expected. Eve remembers that Rosie lacked alchemical talent and required multiple attempts and fragments to succeed.
The maid worries about the 8th princess's success, but Eve remains calm and confident.
Rosie stands happily with her own knight, having always been able to get what she wants.
Eve asks about Michaelis' whereabouts, and the maid explains he is being prepared in the reception room.
The maid explains that Michaelis must look his best today to match the princess's royal appearance.
Eve acknowledges the difficulty of high society and expresses her desire to go and greet him.
The maid suggests that the imprinting process has likely made Sir Agnito feel much closer to Eve.
The head maid agrees to escort the princess to the reception room to see her knight.
A team of busy servants surrounds Michaelis as they work to prepare him for the upcoming event.
The servants are startled by Eve's sudden arrival and insist that the princess wait outside for now.
Michaelis gazes toward the door with an intense look as he hears his princess arrive.
Princess Eve enters the room just as a man's dark garment falls to the floor.
The princess freezes in the doorway, her expression filled with shock and utter confusion. A close-up focuses on the knight's toned chest and the sharp line of his collarbone.
Michaelis stands fully shirtless in the sunlit room, his posture stiff and visibly surprised.
From the doorway, Eve watches as the heavy black fabric drops from the knight's form.
Eve stares ahead with wide amber eyes, seemingly transfixed by the sight before her. The princess calls out her knight's name in a startled tone as he stands bare-chested.
Eve notices a strange sparkling effect on the knight's face and wonders what is happening.
Flustered and red-faced, Eve covers her eyes while trying to explain her sudden intrusion.
Peony, a red-haired maid, excitedly asks the princess how the knight's new appearance looks.
The maid explains she used the Starry Night makeup technique to enhance the knight's eyes.
Eve orders the maid to stop while the servant marvels at the knight's overwhelming beauty.
Leanne asks the knight to sit for more makeup, and he agrees to follow her instructions.
Looking toward her knight, Princess Eve offers a soft and slightly embarrassed smile.
Eve offers to leave while he is dressed, but Michaelis claims he is perfectly comfortable. Surprising her, Michaelis asks the princess to stay with him instead of departing the room.
A close-up shows the knight's face as he blushes while waiting for his master's response. The servants continue their work around the shirtless knight while Eve stands nearby in thought. Eve reacts with a surprised sound as the knight insists on her presence during his grooming.
Eve realizes that the formidable Michaelis Agnito is unexpectedly vulnerable to the dressing-up process. A glowing visual represents the strengthening emotional bond forming between the princess and her knight.
Watching him, Eve feels a strange tingling sensation as she contemplates their growing personal connection.
Accepting his request, the princess takes a seat to stay by the knight's side.
Hugh collects a garment, explaining that they must also apply makeup to the knight's torso.
Michaelis questions the necessity of applying makeup to his entire upper body for the banquet.
Hugh explains that highlighting specific muscles and features is essential for his formal appearance tonight.
Eve laughs softly, telling her knight to endure the tedious process for the palace's sake.
The knight looks toward Eve as the servants resume their meticulous preparation of his body.
A magnificent blue and gold uniform stands on display, making Eve feel slightly embarrassed.
Hugh presents an item on a tray, informing the knight of its necessity for banquets.
A close-up shows a black lace garment that all personal knights are required to wear.
Narrative text identifies the ceremonial item as a black-laced blindfold used at imperial social events.
The blindfold serves to dehumanize homunculi and prevent them from looking at the noble guests.
Michaelis wears the black lace across his eyes, his expression remaining neutral and stoic. Eve looks out the window, reflecting on the long history of oppression against artificial beings.
The princess notes that Rosie's long imprinting process has likely concluded, shifting the political landscape.
Eve mumbles that Sir Millard has finally become the personal knight for her younger sister.
Michaelis watches the princess silently, his gaze focused on her as she stands in thought.
Eve clarifies she doesn't want Michaelis to feel any shame regarding another princess's new knight.
A soft smile touches the knight's face as he is surrounded by glowing white blossoms. A thought bubble highlights the knight's presence directly in front of his chosen master, Eve.
Eve looks back at him with a serious and unwavering gaze while sitting on the sofa.
The princess smiles warmly, assuring her knight that she will never regret her decision. Michaelis notes her affectionate tone regarding the other knight. Eve insists she only needs him.
Eve tells Michaelis not to be jealous, promising she will never take back his position.
The knight accepts her promise and swears an official oath to serve only Princess Eve. The servants blush and swoon at the romantic and loyal atmosphere between the two leads.
Sidella enters to announce the ceremony's conclusion and tells the princess to start her preparations.
The maid notes that the long-awaited time for the imperial banquet has finally arrived.
Michaelis stares ahead with sharp violet eyes, mentally preparing for the upcoming night's social battlefield.
Michaelis Agneto offers a faint, mysterious smile while preparing for the upcoming royal event.
The grand imperial ballroom is filled with elegantly dressed nobles awaiting the evening's festivities.
Guests mingle throughout the opulent hall, surrounded by the golden light of the banquet.
Two noblewomen discuss the rumor that the seventh princess has finally obtained a personal knight.
The green-clad noblewoman turns in surprise, sensing a significant presence moving through the ballroom.
They wonder if the woman who just passed was the princess, though they doubt a recluse would attend.
A delicate, pearl-adorned heel takes a purposeful step onto the polished marble of the ballroom floor.
Princess Eve makes a stunning entrance, escorted by the blindfolded and formidable Sir Michaelis Agneto.
Eve radiates royal confidence while her knight stands stoically beside her in his ceremonial uniform.
Gossiping guests confirm the tabloid rumors were true as they catch sight of the princess's partner.
A wave of shock ripples through the crowd as they observe the unexpected and striking pair.
Behind his ceremonial blindfold, Michaelis maintains a focused and neutral expression amidst the social scrutiny. The shimmering atmosphere of the ballroom reflects the high stakes of this important political debut.
Eve turns to her knight, inquiring about his initial impressions of his very first imperial banquet.
Michaelis remains silent, his stoic presence serving as a perfect contrast to the lively, crowded room.
In a humorous interlude, the knight feels overwhelmed by the flamboyant atmosphere and the servants' excitement.
Stepping into the crowd, Michaelis asks the princess to reveal her specific plan for the night.
Eve explains her goal is to leave a lasting impression on the people she deems useful.
The knight asks for instructions. Eve tells him his only job is to stand there charmingly.
Michaelis agrees to his task and promises to alert Eve if any of her siblings approach.
Taking a steadying breath, the princess prepares herself to initiate the first phase of her strategy.
Eve identifies her target, a purple-haired noblewoman, and decides it is finally time to begin.
A playful visual shows Eve boasting about her prepared treasure chest of secret information and plans.
Narrative text describes the empire as a place founded upon the dual pillars of magic and alchemy.
The Hadalamid Empire relies on magic crystals as its primary and most essential source of power.
Visual records introduce the Pinello Barony, a noble house with a specific and vital imperial role.
The Pinella family is historically responsible for supervising the empire's critical and lucrative crystal mines.
Glowing red energy pulses from the depths of the crystal mines, representing the source of wealth.
The Baron stands with his troops, highlighting the military and industrial importance of his family's fief.
Eve approaches the purple-haired woman, confident that securing her support will provide excellent political backing.
Lady Pinello observes the array of drinks, noting to herself that the available alcohol is quite strong.
The noblewoman is startled by Eve's sudden approach, nearly dropping her glass in her surprise.
Princess Eve offers a warm, disarming smile to the woman she has specifically chosen to recruit.
Lady Pinello curtsies as the princess politely acknowledges her, creating a formal but friendly opening.
Eve mentions she heard the lady has been diligently managing the barony's affairs since her wedding. The princess asks if the lady is attending for her husband. The noblewoman is shocked Eve knows. Eve charmingly suggests it's impossible for a husband to willingly leave such a beautiful wife behind.
Lady Pinello blushes deeply, clearly flattered and surprised by the princess's unexpected and direct compliments.
Eve shifts the conversation to business, asking if Baron Pinello is still as busy as the rumors claim.
The lady admits she is learning fief management because her husband's duties keep him constantly occupied.
Praising her brilliance, Eve assures the lady she will excel. The noblewoman thanks her for the encouragement.
Eve notes this will be the lady's first summer in the fief since marrying half a year ago. Visuals depict a raging river as Eve warns that the Rasatora River floods every 50 years.
Lady Penelo is visibly stunned, admitting she has never heard of such a recurring natural disaster.
Eve explains she discovered the 50-year cycle through diligent research within the Imperial Library's records.
Terrible monsters are shown attacking as Eve warns that floods often lead to catastrophic defensive collapses.
The noblewoman looks terrified, processing the grave implications of a potential monster raid on her home.
Smiling kindly, Eve offers to provide the full library data if the lady visits her living quarters.
Lady Penelo promises to visit the palace tomorrow, expressing deep gratitude for the princess's vital assistance.
Eve smiles with satisfaction, knowing her first move to secure a powerful ally has succeeded perfectly.
Princess Eve laughs with her guests as Michaelis stands alertly by her side during the banquet.
A noblewoman notes that the 7th princess is unexpectedly adept at the high-stakes social game.
Rosie and the 6th princess watch from the balcony, curious about the princess's formidable new knight.
Rosie whispers a command to her companion, urging him to take immediate action against her sister.
The pair watches Eve's success with frustration as she continues to dominate the banquet's attention.
The 6th princess startles Rosie by tapping her shoulder during her secret observation of the ballroom.
Rosie and the prince quickly flee the balcony as the 6th princess passes them by.
The 6th princess calls for Elijah while they walk together through the ornate palace hall.
Turning her gaze, the princess asks her knight if he understands his current objective.
The blindfolded knight remains silent, acknowledging his master's question with a stoic and neutral expression.
Michaelis addresses Eve as she finishes a glass of wine among the chatting noble guests. The knight alerts the princess that her royal siblings are currently approaching her specific location.
Eve politely excuses herself from the group, claiming a sudden need for some fresh air. The princess successfully evades her approaching siblings by making a quick and tactical social exit.
The heavy doors shut behind the pair, sealing them away from the noise of the ballroom.
Michaelis notes they have successfully managed to escape the social pressure of the imperial party.
Sighing with relief, the princess credits her knight for their smooth and quiet departure from the crowd.
Eve suddenly stumbles, prompting Michaelis to catch her and ask if she has been injured.
The princess flinches and tries to play off her physical discomfort as nothing worth mentioning.
Eve's feet throb painfully after walking through the palace in such extremely high-heeled shoes. Michaelis suggests using magic to ease the pain, but Eve prioritizes maintaining an elegant royal appearance. The knight considers her response with a thoughtful expression while they remain alone in the hall. Michaelis gently commands the princess to sit so he can address her physical strain immediately.
Eve watches with confusion as her personal knight suddenly drops to one knee before her.
The knight takes the princess's foot in his hands, shocking her with the unexpected intimacy. Princess Eve blushes intensely at the knight's direct and protective show of personal care. Using simple everyday magic, the knight begins to soothe the intense soreness in her feet. Michaelis asks if she feels better. The flustered princess admits that the pain has subsided. Blushing, Eve wonders if the knight learned such smooth and charming techniques at his training school. The two share a quiet and intimate moment together in the moonlit and private hallway. Michaelis' expression shifts to one of focused intensity as he senses an approaching presence nearby. Sensing a potential threat, the knight prepares to draw his sword while Eve calls his name.
Michaelis addresses his princess as he prepares to defend her from a potential intruder.
A dark silhouette steps forward from the shadows, intruding upon the pair's private and quiet moment.
Eve stares at the newcomer, thinking about how long she has awaited this specific encounter.
In a chibi interlude, Eve celebrates her success while Michaelis identifies a suspicious lurking person. A man bows deeply and claims he has been waiting for the 7th princess to arrive.
The red-haired man, Alvin Redmond, praises the princess for her ability to spot underappreciated talent. Eve reacts with utter shock and confusion as she processes the identity of the man before her. A dramatic reveal identifies the man as Alvin Redmond, startling the unsuspecting and focused princess. The princess is stunned, recognizing Alvin as a man destined to become a notoriously corrupt official.
Alvin offers a greasy smile, exuding an aura of smug and oily confidence toward the royal.
Narrative text explains Alvin's noble background and his reputation for frequent administrative and personnel transfers. A chibi representation shows Alvin feeling the immense weight of a past professional demotion. Despite his failures, Alvin regained a high-ranking treasury position through his father's significant political power.
Alvin laughs maniacally while rolling in a massive and sparkling pile of stolen imperial gold.
Eve remembers with bitterness that she was once one of the many victims of his corruption. The princess recalls being denied her rightful imperial gifts due to Alvin's persistent financial schemes. Alvin is depicted as a devilish figure gleefully hoarding wealth away from the royal palace.
Looking back at him with disgust, Eve acknowledges his undeniable competence in a very strange field.
The blindfolded knight glares at the red-haired man as he asks the princess if she knows him.
Alvin Redmond looks terrified, his whimpering and trembling compared to the distress of a small, frightened dog.
Maintaining her royal composure, Princess Eve calmly confirms her prior acquaintance with the nervous official before her.
Eve considers the potential risk of creating a quick-witted enemy if she handles this delicate situation poorly.
The princess offers a warm and disarming smile as she politely greets Sir Redmond with grace.
Alvin's face brightens with joy as he expresses his long-standing desire to speak with the esteemed princess.
Alvin claims his talent was recognized by the princess, while she wonders about the rumors he mentions.
Bursting into tears, the emotional official laments the scandalous gossip regarding his repeated personnel transfers and failures.
He blames Count Sanchez for the rumors but feels vindicated now that the princess has acknowledged him.
Eve reacts with a small, inquisitive sound as she processed the man's intense and emotional professional outburst.
Narrative text explains that Count Sanchez has a historically poor relationship with Alvin's influential father, Count Redmond.
A visual record depicts Alvin being forced to leave his office after being demoted by the superior.
With sparkling eyes and a hopeful expression, the official asks the princess if his suspicions were correct.
Eve realizes that her own past failures might have been orchestrated by the corrupt and calculating Count Sanchez.
In a simplified visual, Eve addresses the man directly as she prepares to issue her specific instructions.
Eve orders him to return to the ceremonial division. Alvin is confused, claiming his current duties are complete. The princess notes that many sacrifices and rapid preparations were made specifically for Rosie's rushed selection ceremony.
Eve observes that the quantity of unapproved and potentially illegal ritual offerings will likely be quite considerable today.
A glowing red fragment represents the illegal use of the Philosopher's Stone during the younger princess's recent ceremony.
Eve tells him to reduce the records, explaining they cannot leave a history that harms the crown. Moving closer, the princess whispers that she believes the official is uniquely capable of assisting her mission.
Alvin excitedly agrees to the task, boasting that manipulative paperwork is his specialty while Eve remains quiet.
Eve assures him he will do a thorough job. The official is overwhelmed by her royal praise. Eve commands him to catch his superior's attention while the man quickly zooms away to begin working.
The princess and her knight watch the official depart, both focused on the next phase of their plan.
Sighing with relief, Princess Eve allows herself a brief moment of calm after successfully manipulating the corrupt official.
Eve reflects on how the illegal details of Rosie's recent success will now be buried and forgotten forever.
She acknowledges this benefits her sister but prevents Alvin from following his previous path of total corruption.
Staggering from exhaustion, Eve finds comfort in knowing she will not be tormented by this man again.
Michaelis catches his master as she stumbles, inquiring if she is injured or needs to move elsewhere.
Rejecting his suggestion to leave, the princess asks for only a single quiet moment to regain her strength.
Eve leans her head against her knight's chest, finding a rare moment of peace amidst the high-stakes banquet. The two stand close together in the hallway, their different backgrounds forgotten in this brief and intimate exchange.
Michaelis looks down toward his princess, his expression softened by the vulnerability shown by his usually strong master.
Resting her eyes, Eve allows herself to be supported by the unwavering and protective presence of her knight.
The knight asks if her feet are still in pain. The startled princess denies any remaining physical discomfort.
In a comical visual, Eve wobbles slightly while explaining that her mental stress has finally been eased.
Eve admits she was deeply shaken by the fear of making a mistake during her first public appearance.
Reassuring her, Michaelis tells the princess she performed excellently despite the immense social and political pressure.
Eve feels rejuvenated, though her knight asks if she requires any further rest before they continue their evening.
Taking a purposeful step, the princess declines further rest and wonders when her younger sister will finally arrive.
Eve reaches for a handle and slowly creaks open the door to a private room within the palace.
Entering the room, the pair observes several noblemen. Eve notes her objective for the night is almost complete.
Narrative text identifies the group as aristocratic sons currently attending the Empire's prestigious Gnosis Academy for the elite.
The group includes the heirs of Count Reindel and Marquis Remichiello, both holding glasses of imperial wine.
Despite their individual brilliance, these men have all lost their rights of succession because they are not firstborn.
Highlighting a significant historical deviation, the text notes that these two men unexpectedly managed to inherit their titles.
Eve asks Michaelis to wait behind this time. The knight asks for the reasoning behind her unusual command. Turning back, the princess explains she must lower her barriers to successfully gain entry into their social circle. Left behind in the hallway, the simplified knight tilts his head in total confusion over his master's instructions. Narrative text observes that high society circles primarily function as a competitive marriage marketplace. Walking purposefully, Eve decides to approach the nobles boldly despite her lack of connections. Surveying a group of noblemen, Eve determines she only needs to recruit one.
The princess makes a grand entrance, approaching the man gathered near a massive painting.
Shimmering blossoms surround Princess Eve as she presents a radiant and polished royal image.
Eve offers a warm, dazzling smile, determined to successfully infiltrate the exclusive social circle.
A determined thought bubble highlights Eve's singular goal to fit in with the group. Clutching her necklace, the princess mentally prays she can secure at least one ally.
In a chibi thought bubble, Eve pleads for success while the noblemen watch her approach.
A blonde nobleman remarks on the crowded room as Eve stands politely before him.
The blonde man invites Eve to sit beside him, catching her completely off guard.
Startled by the sudden hospitality, Eve realizes this interaction is deviating from her expectations.
Eve identifies the man as Calix Rimichiello, an aristocrat notorious for his lack of manners.
While thinking Calix, the princess wonders what his true intentions are behind the polite invitation.
Eve attempts to steer the conversation toward their studies at the prestigious Gnosis Academy.
Expressing interest in the academy, Eve asks if she may listen to their stories.
A nobleman laughs, admitting he has no idea where to begin his chaotic academy tales.
Wine glasses fill the table as the man describes the wild atmosphere of their school.
Eve smiles, thinking her plan to integrate into their group is progressing perfectly.
An empty wine glass is held up as a man points out the princess's drink.
3 noblemen swarm Eve, shouting that they cannot let her glass remain empty for long.
Feeling overwhelmed, a confused chibi Eve is surrounded by men offering their drinks.
Eve stares at the 2 full glasses in her hands, realizing something is very wrong.
Frowning, the princess detects that the drinks have been maliciously spiked with strong brandy. Narrative text explains that palace law deems leaving a gifted drink unfinished as extremely rude.
Eve realizes the noblemen are intentionally trying to put her in a difficult political position.
Sitting on the sofa, the princess looks stressed while contemplating her next tactical move.
Eve observes the group, feeling the weight of the social trap they have set.
Calix offers a smug grin, clearly enjoying the princess's struggle with the poisoned social situation.
Noting that Calix hasn't offered a drink, Eve suspects he is the mastermind behind this.
The princess wonders if Calix has been manipulating the entire situation to gain leverage.
A wide view shows the men towering over Eve as she sits trapped between them. Clenching her glass, Eve weighs the risks of following the blonde nobleman's hidden agenda.
Looking down with intensity, Eve focuses on Calix Rimichiello as she prepares her response.
A voice cuts through the tension from the shadows, calling out to the seated princess.
Michaelis reaches for the glass, announcing his intention to drink the spiked wine for her.
Startled and relieved, Princess Eve looks up as her personal knight suddenly intervenes. Michaelis downs the alcohol in a single gulp, protecting his master from the social trap.
Eve asks if he is all right. The knight stoically confirms he is perfectly fine.
Calix glares at the knight with a silent and deeply calculating expression of disapproval. The blonde nobleman remarks that homunculi are specifically trained to be immune to poisons.
Calix suggests alcohol is meaningless to them. Michaelis retorts he is simply assisting his master.
Intense sparks of hostility fly as Michaelis and Calix engage in a silent visual confrontation.
Eve decides to leave, thanking the man and claiming she needs to cool down. The princess hurries away with her knight while Calix clenches his fist in silent rage.
Eve and Michaelis walk together through a quiet hallway, the moonlight casting long shadows behind them.
Turning to her, the knight prepares to address the princess regarding the night's events.
Michaelis scolds Eve for forgetting his presence and his duty to protect her from harm.
Eve looks away, admitting she has never had anyone to rely on for help before.
The knight explains the wine was purposely spiked with extra alcohol to target the princess.
Princess Eve laughs softly to herself while looking out at the vast star-filled night sky. The princess admits that she has been deceived by similar social traps during her past life.
Michaelis pauses and clenches his fist, silently processing the princess's revelation about her difficult past experiences. The knight offers to drink any strong alcohol gifted to Eve to protect her from potential intoxication. Leaning against the stone balcony, Eve reflects quietly on her knight's unwavering and unexpected offer of protection. The princess agrees to the arrangement, expressing how truly grateful she was for his earlier timely intervention.
Eve blushes deeply, feeling a sudden wave of warmth at the realization that someone is finally helping her.
Narrative text emphasizes the profound emotional weight and comfort of finally having a trusted ally by one's side.
The pair stands in comfortable silence on the balcony, their silhouettes framed by the pale moonlight and stars. Close visuals capture an intimate exchange of glances between the princess and her knight in the quiet night.
A grand, glowing chandelier signals a shift in the scene toward another part of the imperial palace.
In a lavish dressing room, maids attend to the 8th princess while her silver-haired knight stands nearby.
The maids ask the 8th princess how she feels about having the empire's white rose as her knight.
Sir Sylvestian Millard bows formally, stating that serving the princess is the highest honor he could receive.
Rosanite commands her knight to become the greatest in the empire to ensure she shines above all others. The blindfolded knight promises that he will not disappoint her, accepting his new role with stoic determination.
A sharp close-up of the princess's red eye reveals her intense and calculating focus on her social standing. Rosanite takes her knight's hand, noting to herself that he is the special guardian she specifically chose.
A close-up of their formal attire as the princess suggests it is time for them to depart.
The grand ballroom doors creak open as the herald announces the arrival of Princess Rosanite Nadia Hadelamid. Glowing with radiance, the 8th princess makes her entrance alongside her personal knight, Sir Sylvestian Millard.
The gathered noble guests react with expressions of delight and laughter as the princess enters the hall.
Guests whisper amongst themselves, admiring the princess's beauty and the striking appearance of her silver-haired knight.
Noblemen murmur that the knight's impressive caliber is perfectly suited to match the status of the 8th princess.
A satisfied smirk appears on the princess's face as she enjoys the praise and attention from the crowd.
Rosie reflects that choosing Sylvestian was the right move despite his difficult behavior during the selection ceremony.
Noble guests crowd around the staircase, wishing the princess a happy birthday and offering their sincere congratulations.
Rosie thanks the guests and encourages them to enjoy the party while privately savoring the taste of attention.
Suddenly, the princess is startled by a group of noblemen who shout her name with loud, exuberant energy.
The princess's brothers whine about waiting for her arrival, though she privately considers their behavior to be annoying.
The brothers point at Sylvestian, insulting him as a haughty homunculus and demanding that he be scolded immediately.
Rosie's expression twitches with suppressed rage as she mentally curses her brothers for their loud and stupid comments.
The princess worries that her brother's outbursts are publicly advertising the fact that she lacks skill in alchemy. A blonde woman named Betty arrives with her companion, greeting the 8th princess and interrupting the brothers.
Rosie expresses honor at her sister's presence, while Betty notes it is only natural for her to attend.
The princess sighs with relief, thanking goodness that Betty happened to come over and silence her brothers.
Betty praises her sister for the hard work she put into obtaining the Imperial Palace's greatest knight.
The noblewoman mentions that few tried to claim Sylvestian because the imprinting process was known to be difficult.
Rosie is caught off guard by the sincere praise, making a surprised sound as she processes the compliment. Sylvestian bows deeply toward the princess, offering a formal apology for the inconvenience he caused her earlier.
Kneeling before his master, the knight vows to make up for his past disloyalty with absolute future loyalty.
A close-up highlights the intimate moment as the silver-haired knight kisses the princess's hand in front of the guests.
The ladies in the ballroom react with excitement and kia sounds at the knight's dramatic show of devotion.
Rosie is impressed by the knight's performance, thinking he is quite good at reading and manipulating the social atmosphere.
The princess commands Sir Millard to stand, and the knight promptly obeys his master's royal request.
Watching from a distance, Eve listens to a guest describe the event as a scene from a fairy tale.
Princess Eve observes the interaction closely, noting with satisfaction that things are starting well this time around.
Eve sees that Rosie is satisfied with Sir Millard's performance, indicating the plan is moving forward successfully.
The princess walks with Michaelis, feeling reassured that her own knight's presence ensures her safety and success.
Narrative text notes that Rosie is falling for Michaelis again, depicting a moment of connection between the two. A collage of shadows and memories weighs heavily on the atmosphere as the scene shifts.
Princess Eve stands in the ballroom, her expression hardened as she internally rejects a disastrous outcome.
Startled from her thoughts, the 7th princess turns as someone calls out to her.
Michaelis approaches his master, informing her that the 3rd princess has already departed the festivities.
Eve agrees it is time to move, suggesting they follow the crowd toward the central staircase.
With a confident smile, the princess prepares to confront the primary focus of the evening's banquet.
A blonde noblewoman watches the unfolding social dynamics with a look of mild, curious concern.
Turning to her companion, the woman notes that Eve is finally approaching to congratulate her sister.
The noblewoman anticipates a tense confrontation now that both princesses have secured their legendary personal knights.
Guests whisper about Sir Ignito's fearsome reputation as the monster from the Imperial floating prison.
Narrative text recalls Eve's impeccable behavior earlier in the day before the birthday girl's grand arrival.
Standing in the shadows, a brooding Rosanite feels her spotlight being stolen by her elder sister.
Radiant and surrounded by floral imagery, Eve calls out to her sister to begin their greeting.
The 7th princess offers formal birthday congratulations, wishing for her younger sister to continue blooming beautifully.
Rosanite offers a cold, insincere thanks while Eve detects her sister's growing resentment over the gossip. Eve attempts to end the interaction politely, wishing Rosie an enjoyable night before preparing to leave.
The atmosphere freezes as Rosanite calls out to her sister, stopping Eve's departure with a single word.
Rosie offers a sharp, mocking smile as she mentions Eve's success in obtaining a personal knight.
With a calculating gaze, the 8th princess requests a formal introduction to her sister's new guardian. Eve's heart races with sudden anxiety, wondering if her sister has developed a dangerous interest in Michaelis.
Clenching her dress, the princess tries to convince herself that this is merely a standard social formality.
Eve formally introduces Sir Michaelis Ignito, who offers a deep and respectful bow to the 8th princess.
The ballroom falls into an expectant silence as the two rival princesses and their knights face off.
Eve grows increasingly nervous as her sister remains silent, wondering why Rosie is simply staring at Michaelis.
A close-up captures Rosanite's intense and unreadable stare as she evaluates her sister's chosen protector.
Michaelis remains perfectly still in his bow, projecting a sense of stoic and unwavering imperial discipline.
Rosie offers a sweet but predatory smile, causing Eve to realize a social trap is being set.
Rosinite extends her hand toward the knight, a move that leaves Eve gasping in sudden shock.
Behind his blindfold, Michaelis appears slightly strained by the unconventional and demanding gesture from the princess.
Looking up at her sister, Rosie's expression is smugly victorious while Eve's mind races with frantic questions.
A decorative credits page features the 7th princess and lists the staff responsible for the series.
Eve realizes with horror that her sister is demanding a public show of devotion from Michaelis.
Breaking into a cold sweat, Eve regrets her earlier complacency regarding the dangers of the imprinting ceremony.
The princess observes her bowed knight, worrying that his obscured vision makes the social manipulation even deadlier.
Rosie maintains her graceful pose, though Eve suspects she is intentionally trying to humiliate the 7th princess.
Narrative text suggests Rosie believes the knight will eventually despise his current master for her lower status.
Eve looks on with visible disgust, mentally cursing her sister for such a blatant and dirty trick.
To the surprise of the onlookers, Michaelis reaches out and firmly takes the 8th princess's hand.
A sharp pang of jealousy and pain strikes Eve's heart as she watches the intimate contact.
Michaelis performs the formal kiss on the back of Rosie's hand, fulfilling the demanding social protocol.
The knight repeats his formal greeting to Rosinite, who looks down at him with immense satisfaction. Eve looks away with a pained expression, lamenting that she couldn't protect her knight from this interaction.
As he stands, Michaelis makes a subtle movement to wipe his mouth while pretending to adjust himself.
Eve is stunned, realizing her knight is cleaning his face immediately after touching the other princess.
Michaelis whispers to Eve that the touch was repulsive compared to the comfort he feels with her.
Flushed with relief and joy, Eve is overwhelmed by the unexpected and profound loyalty of her knight. A herald announces the emperor's arrival as the crowd offers blessings to the son of the empire.
Rosie greets her father enthusiastically, though he warns her that state affairs will cut his visit short.
The 8th princess graciously accepts his limited time, and the two share a lighthearted familial laugh together.
Stepping forward, Eve offers a radiant and humble greeting to her father amidst a backdrop of blossoms.
The emperor asks if Eve attended. She confirms and says she was congratulating Rosie, earning his praise.
Rosie is told that her birthday gift, a garden of white roses, is ready for her. The 8th princess expresses her immense gratitude to her father as Eve stands between the two.
Eve regrets her proximity to her giggling sister while the blonde princess enjoys her father's favoritism.
Guests murmur that the 8th princess receives most of the favor while the 7th remains overlooked.
A dejected Eve decides it is better to act the part of an unloved, unfortunate princess. Observers express pity for the 7th princess, noting she is also the emperor's child. Looking focused and determined, Eve closes her eyes as she prepares for her next social maneuver.
Walking together, Eve and Michaelis hold hands, their physical contact providing a source of silent strength.
A close-up captures the knight's firm and supportive grip on the hand of his royal master.
Looking up at her protector, the 7th princess softly calls out the name of her personal knight.
The pair shares a quiet, intimate moment while navigating the high-stakes atmosphere of the imperial banquet.
Feeling comforted by her knight's presence, Eve allows a soft and genuine smile to touch her face.
The emperor asks Eve if she has a request, offering a prize for her successful knight appointment.
Startled, Chibi Eve listens as the emperor tells her not to be surprised and offers time.
In a small chibi panel, the princess takes a moment to think about her father's offer.
Eve declines the extra time, stating that she already knows exactly what she needs from her father. The princess requests to move her living space while the grand palace architecture looms in the background. Surprised, the emperor asks for clarification, wondering if his daughter is dissatisfied with her current residence.
Eve describes her ideal room, imagining a space with a powder room and a sunlit balcony.
Gazing over the palace gardens, the princess envisions the freedom and status a new residence represents. The emperor is shocked to hear her current space lacks a powder room. Eve confirms it. Furious, the emperor shouts at the administrators, outraged by the blatant neglect shown to a princess.
While the emperor rages, Chibi Eve notes he is likely ashamed of his past neglect of her.
Eve reminds her father it is Rosie's birthday and asks him not to be too harsh.
The emperor agrees to restrain himself for the sake of the joyous birthday celebration.
Narrowing his eyes thoughtfully, the emperor contemplates the implications of granting his daughter's unusual request. The emperor publicly announces a gift for the 7th princess, Evian Rose Cloel Hadelamit, before the gathered nobility.
Murmurs ripple through the ballroom as Eve stands in the spotlight of her father's sudden public favor.
A shocked Rosie and a calculating 3rd princess watch the emperor's unexpected show of imperial affection. Guests whisper that a named room signifies favor even greater than the 8th princess's new garden. The 3rd princess notes she was previously the only daughter granted the honor of a named Rewound.
Eve bows her head in gratitude. The emperor promises to pay her a visit after her move.
Eve promises to prepare tea, though she privately doubts her busy father will actually visit her.
A pleased Chibi Emperor smiles at his daughter, who looks back with a look of mild surprise. The Emperor bids the entire ballroom to continue enjoying the festivities as he prepares to depart.
Noble guests continued to murmur amongst themselves, processing the dramatic shift in the imperial family's hierarchy.
Guests speculate on the Emperor's new liking for Eve, while the third princess finds it interesting.
Eve realizes the night's events may be a major turning point while her sisters watch her closely.
A wide view of the banquet hall depicts the ongoing social dynamics of the Empire's elite.
Rosie glares with resentment while the third princess hides her calculating expression behind an elegant fan.
Surrounded by laughter and attention, Eve finds herself at the center of a newly supportive social circle.
Guests discuss the Room of Verdure, rumored to be the most beautiful space in the East Palace.
Noblemen beg for future invitations to the room, and Eve responds with a polite and practiced laugh.
From a distance, Eve spots a specific woman standing near the grand staircase of the ballroom.
Narrative text identifies the brown-haired woman as Lady Anais Luciard, daughter of a prominent count.
Anais Luciard is identified as the most important guest present at the birthday banquet tonight.
Eve looks toward the lady with intense recognition, internally calling out her name in silent determination. Crowds of guests block Eve's path, laughing and shouting as she tries to reach Lady Anais.
Realizing she must talk to the lady immediately, Eve watches as Anais begins to walk away.
Princess Eve bids everyone farewell, expressing her enjoyment of the conversation and a need for rest.
As the pair departs, Princess Bridget watches Eve and Michaelis leave the festive social circle.
The red-suited man notes Eve's unusual behavior, while Bridget reflects on her father's room gift. Holding her wine glass, Bridget wears a calculating and cold expression during the birthday banquet.
Bridget thinks about the ugly duckling finally learning how to behave gracefully for their father.
Drinking her wine, Bridget claims that Eve is still just a puppy excluded from council meetings.
Bridget agrees with the red-suited man while privately considering if another reason exists for Eve's change.
A guest proclaims Bridget is undoubtedly the primary candidate to inherit the imperial throne.
The blue-haired man adjusts his glasses with a pensive and slightly troubled facial expression.
Bridget turns her sharp gaze toward her companion, noticing his moment of visible hesitation.
Looking distressed, the blue-haired man rubs his temple while processing the current political shifts.
Bridget touches the man's face, promising to personally uncover the seventh princess's true intentions.
Commanding the man to calm down, Bridget receives a respectful acknowledgement from her subordinate.
The man looks up with wide eyes as if suddenly struck by a significant realization.
Lady Luciard waits anxiously behind a marble pillar, her hand clutched to her chest.
Bridget and her companion identify Lady Luciard, noting her presence near the grand staircase. Noblemen speculate the lady sought Bridget regarding business for the Imperial Palace bathhouse.
Narrative text remarks on the difficulty of waiting for responses to the many unread purple letters.
Bridget subjects Lady Luciard to an intense, intimidating stare that leaves the lady visibly shaken.
Lady Luciard calls out as Bridget and the blue-haired man coldly turn their backs.
Struck by a sudden internal shock, Lady Luciard watches the high-ranking royals walk away. Bridget dismisses the lady's concerns, declaring that the Luciard family's affairs are no longer relevant.
Standing alone in the vast hallway, Lady Luciard reflects on her family's predetermined social role. Michaelis asks if the princess is tired and offers to find her a resting place. Eve smiles at her knight, confirming there are several private rooms available for their use. A close-up reveals the focused gaze of the knight behind his protective black blindfold. The knight appears slightly flustered, beads of sweat forming as he follows his master's lead.
Eve looks back at Michaelis and suggests they head toward the Room of Pearls.
Narrative text describes the Imperial Palace as a hub for those who enjoy decadent culture. Narrative text explains the social scandal that occurs if unmarried couples enter such rooms together.
Couples who are caught risk being featured in the next day's sensationalist Palace Gossip magazine.
A guard invites them inside while Eve commands Michaelis to enter the room with her. Narrative text describes the room as a space the palace officially designated for making love.
Michaelis gulps nervously as he realizes the suggestive nature of the room they just entered.
Eve notices her knight has gone completely stiff and asks what is wrong with him.
The princess turns her gaze toward her silent protector, waiting for him to finally speak.
Surprised and blushing, Eve makes a startled sound as the tension in the room rises.
Michaelis looks stunned as he reacts to the princess's sudden and light-hearted laughter. Eve laughs and tells Mikhail to relax, assuring him she has no scandalous intentions tonight.
Claiming she feels better, the princess tells Mikhail to sit down since he was standing.
Lowering his head respectfully, the knight agrees to follow his master's request to take a seat.
The pair sits awkward on opposite ends of the plush sofa in the quiet room.
Silence fills the hallway outside the Room of Pearls while the interior remains completely soundproof. Eve and Michaelis sit together, the princess beginning to discuss the magical properties of the room. Eve notes the silence before Michaelis explains the golden strings signifies that the room is occupied.
The princess explains that the rooms utilize a magical barrier to ensure total silence and privacy.
Eve suggests that while he excels in offensive magic, Michaelis might be vulnerable to defensive spells.
Michaelis mentions her magic studies, prompting Eve to describe her specialty in combining everyday magic.
Admitting her limitations, the princess explains that she possesses no natural talent for offensive magic.
Despite her restricted academic achievements, Eve considers her lack of offensive talent for the best.
Michaelis affirms his role as Eve's sword while they sit together in private.
The knight vows to handle all conflicts so the princess never has to fight.
Eve gazes at her knight, her expression softening with appreciation for his protective declaration.
Internally, Eve acknowledges that such loyalty is a natural byproduct of her knight's imprinting.
With a radiant smile, Eve playfully insists that Michaelis must fulfill his duty perfectly. Michaelis closes his eyes and solemnly confirms his absolute commitment to his master's request.
A resonant chime echoes through the palace, signaling the conclusion of the evening's main events.
Startled by the sound, the pair looks up as the banquet's atmosphere begins to shift.
Michaelis notes the party's official conclusion, signaling it is time to focus on their mission.
The knight gives a firm nod, urging Princess Eve to begin the next phase. Preparing for a critical confrontation, Eve adopts a focused and determined expression before they move. Standing alone, Lady Anais Luciard appears overwhelmed by the weight of her family's secret struggles.
An elegant illustration of the seventh princess serves as the chapter's decorative credits page.
A flashback reveals a meeting half a year ago in Bridget's drawing room with Count Luciard.
Princess Bridget confirms the details of a new business venture while maintaining a cool, superior demeanor.
Anais Luciard expresses concern that the proposed public bathhouse project will yield very little profit.
Bridget dismisses the profit concerns, framing the project as a noble service for commoner hygiene.
Count Luciard offers a strained smile, feeling pressured to accept the honor of the imperial contract. A heavy silence fills the room as the Count realizes the precarious position Bridget has created.
Bridget notes that the Luciard family's dominance in construction materials makes them the only choice.
Beads of sweat form on Count Luciard's face as he feels trapped by Bridget's manipulative offer.
Sensing his hesitation, Bridget coldly offers to terminate the deal if the Count lacks resolve.
Standing up, Bridget points out that many other families are eager to replace the Luciards.
Shocked by the blatant threat, the Count realizes his family's status is on the line. Closing his eyes in defeat, Count Luciard clenches his jaw and accepts the disastrous terms.
Bridget smirks, claiming her only motivation is the welfare of the Empire's many subjects.
A gloved hand firmly stamps the official imperial seal onto the binding legal contract. Returning to the present, Anais laments how easily her father fell for Bridget's honeyed words.
The lady clutches her head in distress, regretting that she couldn't prevent this economic disaster.
Narrative text explains that skyrocketing magic stone prices have made heating the public baths impossible.
Anais worries that the mounting deficits will lead to the total collapse of her family's business.
Distant memories haunt Anais as she recalls Bridget refusing to meet once the project failed. Drinking wine to numb her anxiety, Anais desperately wonders how to save her family from ruin.
Michaelis approaches Anais, introducing himself and stating that his master wishes to speak with her.
Anais is visibly confused that the seventh princess would take any interest in her current plight.
Hesitating, the lady explains that her current social obligations make it difficult to leave immediately.
The knight remains composed, preparing to deliver a specific message from his royal master.
Michaelis promises that Princess Eve respects her time and will not waste a single moment.
Remembering Bridget's cold neglect, Anais clenches her dress as she considers the seventh princess's offer. Deciding to take the risk, Anais agrees to the meeting and asks Michaelis to lead.
The pair walks through the hallway, unnoticed by the remaining guests at the birthday banquet.
Watching from a distance, Rosie looks on with mild curiosity as her sister's knight departs.
Eve greets Lady Luciard warmly as she enters the designated private room for their talk.
Anais offers a polite bow while privately questioning the motive behind the sudden royal summons.
The princess maintains a gentle smile, projecting an air of calm and sincere invitation.
Eve directly mentions the severe business trouble the Luciard family faces due to the imperial mandate.
A close-up of the seventh princess highlights her confident and knowing gaze during the negotiation.
Anais is stunned into silence, realizing that Eve is fully aware of her family's hidden crisis. Narrative text reveals Bridget knew stone outputs would decline, intentionally setting a trap for the Luciards.
Eve explains the cold reality of the third princess's scheme to the bewildered Lady Luciard.
Lady Anais looks stunned as she learns the third princess plans to ruin the Luciard family business.
A silhouette of Princess Bridget looms over Count Luciard, depicting her goal to absorb his business assets.
Eve explains Bridget's scheme to give reconstruction contracts to the Chancellery Guild at a cheap price.
Anais clenches her head in despair, realizing she was foolish to trust the third princess's motives. Princess Eve identifies the Chancellery Guild as being one of the top 3 trade guilds available. Eve explains the guild's plan to buy related businesses and prepare a wide assortment of capital goods. Anais is devastated to learn that her family's liquid funds have dried out at such a critical moment. The lady looks intensely focused as she realizes exactly why the Chancellery Guild's funds are currently drained.
Eve asks if the financial drain happened because they chose to stockpile expensive and rare magic stones.
Princess Eve points out that since they cannot sell the stones immediately, they are financially bound.
The princess notes that exposing the truth about the magic stone hoarding would cause the family trouble.
Anais reacts with bitter anger, shouting that magic stones are the reason for her family's current state. A close-up shows the lady's hands trembling as she realizes Princess Bridget intended this business failure.
Weeping into her hands, Anais admits her foolishness for waiting on the third princess to help them.
Princess Eve watches the lady with a calm, patient, and deeply knowing expression on her face.
Reaching out, the princess tells Anais that none of this is her fault and to stop blaming herself.
Standing together, the princess takes both of the lady's hands to offer her firm and sincere comfort.
Lady Anais views Eve as a savior, imagining papers that represent her family's impending business rescue.
In a chibi panel, Eve expresses her gladness as she and Anais shake hands with renewed determination.
The princess notes that the lady must have been unable to rest well due to her worries.
Eve advises Anais to return home early to rest while they plan to fool Princess Bridget's spies.
Anais agrees to the plan, deciding to maintain an appearance of extreme anxiety to fool any onlookers.
Eve bids the lady farewell as Anais bows deeply before exiting the private meeting room.
A close-up highlights Eve's serene and confident smile as she completes another stage of her plan.
Eve reflects that Bridget's plan for the Chanceley Guild to take the bathhouse business is now impossible. A flashback shows a city block engulfed in flames due to Bridget loosening fire regulations for Chanceley. Narration reveals that the resulting fire was a horrific accident that led to over 300 casualties.
Lady Anais looks toward the future with a soft smile, feeling hopeful for the first time today. Exhausted from the intense social maneuvering, Princess Eve flops onto the sofa with a heavy sigh.
Staring up at the ceiling, the princess allows herself a single moment of quiet and focused peace. Standing up, Eve calls out to her knight, Mikhail, to signal that her private talk is finished.
The princess slides through the thick red curtains of the private room to rejoin the banquet festivities.
Eve stops suddenly with a look of mild surprise as she steps out into the hallway. Looking down a long, quiet palace corridor, Eve calls out the name of her personal knight, Mikhail.
A cute chibi panel depicts Eve proudly celebrating her collection of loyal allies inside a treasure chest.
Laughter and social chatter fill the air beneath a massive chandelier in the Grand Imperial Ballroom.
Princess Rosie stands surrounded by roses, looking deeply annoyed at the ongoing attention her sister is receiving.
The 8th princess wonders if everyone has lost their minds by focusing so much on the 7th princess. Rosie imagines a scandalous situation where Eve and her knight have vanished into the Room of Pearls.
Clutching her forehead, Rosie complains about how intensely annoying she finds her sister's bold social conduct.
Rosie looks surprised and intrigued as she spots something unusual happening down a quiet palace hallway. From a distance, the backs of Eve and Mikhail are seen as they navigate the Imperial Palace.
Looking at the knight's back, Lady Anais identifies the black-haired man as Sir Agnito.
Anais watches the knight from behind, wondering exactly where he is taking the 7th princess tonight.
Creeping along the wall, the lady questions if Eve herself gave the orders for this mysterious detour.
Peeking through the curtains, Rosie watches with wide eyes as her sister and the knight depart together.
Rosie's imagination runs wild with a scandalous threesome theory involving Eve, the knight, and Lady Anais.
Blushing heavily, the 8th princess watches from behind a pillar and questions Eve's sudden social audacity.
Biting her finger nervously, Rosie recalls her desire to be the first to imprint a personal knight.
Determined to intervene, a chibi Rosie creeps forward, deciding she must interrupt her sister's suspicious meeting.
Sir Agnito stands stoically in a quiet palace hallway as Lady Anais Luciard departs. Approaching the knight, Rosie asks if he is not planning on entering the room.
Narrowing her eyes, Rosie considers whether she should ignore her sister's suspicious private meeting.
Sir Agnito remains motionless and silent under the 8th princess's intense and calculating gaze.
Rosie approaches the knight, deciding that teasing him will be a much more entertaining distraction.
Sensing the princess's approach, the blindfolded knight turns his head toward the source of sound.
Standing amidst a sea of roses, Rosie calls out to Sir Agnito to gain his attention. Lowering his head in a respectful bow, Sir Agnito formally greets the 8th princess.
Rosie finds it highly suspicious that her sister would choose to be alone right now.
The princess takes a sudden step forward, causing the knight to flinch in visible discomfort.
Beads of sweat form on Sir Agnito's face as he faces the princess's intimidating presence.
Resting a finger on her chin, Rosie asks if Princess Eve is currently inside the room.
Sir Agnito informs the princess that his master is currently resting alone inside the room.
Rosie reflects on her certainty that Eve is lying and considers her next social move.
Tilting her head, Rosie questions why the personal knight isn't staying by his master's side.
Sir Agnito counters by inquiring why the 8th princess isn't accompanied by her own knight, Millard.
Laughing lightheartedly, Rosie claims she only stepped away for a moment to get some air.
Sir Agnito remains silent and focused, his eyes hidden as he evaluates the princess's excuse.
The knight suggests Rosie keep Sir Millard close as she is far too precious to wander.
Rosie stares at the knight with a cold, blank expression following his protective recommendation.
Sir Agnito looks confused by the princess's sudden silence, his expression showing a moment of hesitation.
Rosie proposes that Sir Agnito escort her instead, putting him in a difficult political position.
The knight looks down in silence, feeling the heavy weight of the princess's unexpected demand. Sir Agnito reflects on his oath of loyalty, which mandates his obedience to any royal request. Narration explains that his status makes it impossible to reject a command from the imperial family. A memory of Eve's recent handshake signifies her seeking permission for their secret plan.
Rosie reaches out and takes the knight's hand, and he agrees to follow her command.
A close-up reveals Sir Agnito's visible frown as he follows the 8th princess against his will. Narration describes the knight's current feeling as terribly unpleasant during this forced social escort.
The sensation is described as even more distressing than the oath he swore to the emperor.
Sir Agnito wonders what could be the reason for such an intense and negative internal reaction.
Accepting his temporary role, Sir Agnito formally offers to escort the 8th princess to the garden.
Eve's voice rings out through the palace hallway as she calls out for her knight, Mikhail.
Turning in the quiet corridor, Eve looks around with confusion, wondering where Mikhail has gone.
Sir Millard walks down the hallway alone, his presence drawing the 7th princess's immediate attention.
Spotting the silver-haired knight, Eve calls out to Sir Millard to inquire about his whereabouts.
Millard explains he is looking for Rosie and asks why Eve is walking without her protector.
Eve looks completely shocked as she begins to understand the knight's sudden and mysterious absence.
Surrounded by roses, Eve realizes that her sister has likely taken Mikhail for her own.
Eve concludes that Rosie and Sir Agnito are currently together somewhere in the palace grounds. Outside at night, a narration bubble confirms that Rosie and Sir Agnito are indeed together.
Rosie complains about the knight's fast pace, and he offers a respectful and quiet apology.
Noting his lack of conversation, Rosie teases him, and he apologizes for his silent nature.
Rosie abruptly pauses her walk and lets go of the knight's hand in the dark garden.
Exhaling with relief, Rosie declares that the exhausting social performance of the night is finally over.
Rosie turns toward the knight and demands to see him with his protective blindfold finally removed.
The knight reacts with shock while a heavy heart thump signifies his growing internal panic.
Rosie asks the knight if he will allow her the honor of uncovering his eyes.
Multiple panels depict the knight's racing pulse as the princess's hand nears his blindfolded face.
A final heart thump underscores the intense and scandalous atmosphere of the Midnight Garden meetings.
Decorative credits page featuring an elegant illustration of Princess Eve in a red dress.
Smiling amidst the roses, Rosie asks the knight if he will allow her the honor of uncovering his eyes.
Narrowing his visible eye, Sir Agnito remains silent, mentally dismissing the princess's request as a ridiculous trick.
Gazing back with a knowing look, Rosie reflects that forced permission is not the same as genuine consent. In a close-up panel, the princess's hand reaches out slowly to touch the knight's protective black blindfold. A loud heart thump echoes through the garden as Sir Agnito stands frozen under the princess's touch.
Looking down, the knight realizes with a start that he is currently unable to move his body.
Beads of sweat form on the knight's face as the princess's hand hovers dangerously close to his eyes.
Rosie's fingers squeeze the fabric of the blindfold while the knight's internal panic continues to rise sharply.
Sir Agnito's eyes widen as Eve's voice suddenly rings out through the night, calling the name Mikhail. Stepping between them, Eve creates a protective shield for her knight while staring down her younger sister.
A close-up of Princess Eve shows her looking at Rosie with a determined and unwavering royal expression.
Rosie maintains a blank and indifferent expression while facing the sudden intervention of the 7th princess.
The two pairs of royals and knights stand in a tense standoff beneath the starry night sky.
Eve directly questions her sister, asking why Rosie felt it was appropriate to take someone else's knight.
Rosie remains momentarily silent, her expression unreadable as she considers how to respond to the accusation. Sir Agnito looks down while Rosie claims the knight merely saw her alone and offered his esper. A close-up of Eve reveals her internal reaction, immediately identifying her sister's claim as a blatant lie. Eve counters the excuse by mentioning that she spoke with Rosie's own knight, Sir Millard, earlier tonight. Resting her cheek on her hand, Rosie lightheartedly laments that their paths simply failed to align tonight. Maintaining a firm tone, Eve advises her sister to finish the rest of her walk with Millard.
Rosie gazes back thoughtfully before agreeing that returning to her own knight would be a good idea.
Sir Millard steps forward and bows, formally offering to escort the 8th princess back to the palace.
Lowering his head respectfully, the silver-haired knight confirms his readiness to follow the princess's lead.
Turning away, Rosie declares she no longer needs a walk and intends to rejoin the banquet hall.
Eve watches her sister depart while Michaelis reflects on the trouble caused despite his new status.
Closing her eyes, the 7th princess breathes a silent plea for things to remain under her control.
Eve looks at a mental image of Rosie and Michaelis, determined to change her previous life's fate.
Rosie and Millard walk away, leaving the garden in a moment of quiet, tension-filled palace transition. The two pairs move in opposite directions, the distance between them growing in the dark garden.
Standing alone with her knight, Eve looks ahead with a soft, thoughtful, and slightly weary expression.
Michaelis turns his head toward his master and asks if something significant happened during her private talk. Staring ahead with a shadow over her eyes, Eve learns that Rosie attempted to remove his blindfold.
Narrative text explains that uncovering a personal knight's eyes implies a request for a knight of service.
A close-up shows Eve's mouth set in a firm line, her silent anger evident as she clenches.
Standing close together, Michaelis offers a sincere apology for leaving the princess alone during the event.
Lowering his head, the knight tells the princess that his absence is not something she should apologize for.
Walking through the bright palace hallway the next day, Michaelis notes the massive pile of invitations received.
A stack of sealed letters confirms that Eve's social standing and value have risen significantly in society.
Eve smiles happily as she notes her banquet preparations and business ventures are all progressing as planned.
Surrounded by falling leaves, the princess confidently reflects that her long-term plans are proceeding without any issues.
With a knowing grin, Michaelis asks if their current trip is part of the plan for her throne.
A red-haired man named Alvin Redman greets the 7th princess with an enthusiastic and cheerful "Ta-da!"
Eve offers a warm smile, noting that it has been quite a while since they last met.
An awkward chibi panel depicts Alvin and Michaelis bowing stiffly to each other during their formal introduction.
Alvin coughs into his hand and mentions her arrival to learn more about the imperial family's activities.
Simply put, Eve explains that these official activities are community services performed by the royal family. Two pairs of hands exchange a large document envelope containing details on royal donations and sponsorships.
Narrative illustration shows imperial officials recording data while coordinating large-scale dispatch assignments in a town.
A group of nobles gathers around a large map-covered table to discuss complex administrative and strategic plans.
Reflecting on her status, the princess notes her official credit is low compared to Bridget.
Alvin Redman urges the princess to review a list of potential political activities to participate in.
Focusing intently, the princess flips through the documents to find a suitable project for her needs. Scanning the list, the lady suddenly pauses as a specific entry captures her complete attention.
The report details a comprehensive investigation into the harsh reality and working conditions of magic stone mines.
Standing stoically behind his master, Michaelis observes as the princess considers her next strategic social move.
Alvin explains that the activities at the beginning of the list are better for starting out.
The man suggests that discovering and sponsoring an artist is a great way to generate fame.
Eve asks Alvin to recommend the specific activity that will yield the most official credit.
Walking down the hall, Michaelis notes her plan to amass credit to visit the stone mines.
Smiling warmly, the princess acknowledges that her knight has correctly deduced her hidden political intentions.
Looking directly at her, Michaelis asks if she brought him along specifically so he would notice her plan.
The lady admits with a gentle smile that she indeed wanted him to understand her purpose.
Eve expresses her sincere desire to improve the poor working conditions of the miners and homunculi.
The knight remains silent, his focused gaze evaluating the princess's surprising and genuine humanitarian concern.
Bathed in soft light, the princess looks toward the future with a peaceful and determined expression.
Watching his master, Michaelis mumbles to himself that the lady is truly sincere about her goals.
Surprised by a sudden sound, the pair pauses their conversation to investigate the source of noise.
Dashing through the corridor, Leanne calls out to Princess Eve with a look of extreme urgency.
Eve and her knight react with visible concern as the maid announces a serious problem.
The imperial family gathers in a grand room for an official meeting with their father.
Chibi panels depict Eve's internal confusion regarding her father's visit and her older sister's presence.
Sipping tea, the lady notes her frequent confusion due to her constantly changing tactical plans. A knight with brown hair, identified as Elijah Halston, stands amidst a field of flowers.
Eve recalls that the knight has served as Bridget's direct driver for a very long time.
A scandalous rumor suggests that Bridget's sister was satisfied with many nights spent with the knight.
Blushing heavily, a chibi Eve questions why her imagination would create such a shameful scenario.
Tension fills the air as the royals and their knights face each other in the room.
A close-up shows a bead of sweat on the lady's face as she faces her family.
Elijah Halston maintains a blank and unreadable expression while observing the 7th princess from across the room.
Surrounded by white blossoms, the knight offers a sharp and knowing smirk toward the 7th princess.
Startled by the knight's intense attention, the lady reacts with visible shock and a heavy blush. Feeling overwhelmed, the lady quickly turns her head away to hide her growing social discomfort. Noticing his master's distress, Michaelis reacts with a silent but intense look of questioning concern.
A close-up of Elijah shows him smirking as he continues to evaluate the princess's reaction.
Michaelis' expression darkens with intense rage as he questions what on earth is currently happening.
Dark energy swirls around the knights as the Emperor looks on with a confused expression.
Breaking the heavy silence, Bridget starts a new conversation by mentioning a sudden point of interest.
Smiling brightly, Eve thanks her father for providing such a beautiful room for her to use. The emperor laughs heartily, expressing his genuine pleasure that his daughter is satisfied with his gift.
Rosie and her sister look on with visible offense while their father praises Eve's room management.
Drinking tea, Eve reflects on her past when she was known only as Princess Bridget's sister.
Bridget claims that Eve must be happy to finally receive direct recognition and articles from their father.
Looking closely at his daughter, the emperor reflects on how much he has had to endure.
Bridget watches the interaction between her father and sister with a calm and deeply calculating gaze.
Setting down her teacup, Bridget advises her sister that doing things in moderation is perfectly acceptable.
Bridget mentions that a specific achievement has come to her mind during their official political discussion.
The emperor asks if Bridget is interested in the current reconstruction and pioneering efforts in Hazaloon.
Bridget claims her interest stems from a long-standing fascination as the emperor reacts with mild surprise.
With a confident smirk, Bridget declares her absolute desire to participate in the Hazaloon reconstruction project.
Sitting before her father, Eve thinks that her sister has come this far to tell this story.
Narration explains that Bridget plans to use her political sense to drive business to her ally, Marquis Chansley.
A chibi Eve sips her tea with a bored expression, wondering if she is just a bridesmaid.
Eve watches the room with focused intensity, thinking her sister will want to see her oppose their father.
Bridget watches Eve with a sharp smile, thinking her sister can bite just like in her past life.
Sopping her tea, Eve resolves that she will not be easily bitten by her sister this time.
The emperor addresses Bridget as Betty and asks if she is curious about the business, which she confirms. Narration reveals a plan to relocate the residents of the District 14 East Slum to District 27.
Bridget claims the policy will make their father's honor shine, while Eve mentally curses the cruel proposal.
Bridget explains District 14 was a barrier against beasts, but now threats are increasing in the south.
Strategic illustrations show that moving the poor to District 27 will protect trade routes and slow planetary damage.
Bridget expresses admiration for her father's plan, while Eve notes her sister has noticed every detail.
Close-up of Bridget winking with a smug and confident smile during the intense political meeting. Calming herself with a sip of tea, Eve remains silent while evaluating her sister's aggressive maneuvering.
Looking at her sister with a smirk, Bridget asks if the poor could clear the wasteland.
Eve stops her teacup midair, her expression tightening as she processes the ruthless human policy.
Eve reflects on the plan to use the poor to clear dangerous wastelands as an insufficient strategy.
Looking at her father's profile, Eve decides her only move is to counter his current plan.
Bridget sits contentedly while the other royals in the room react with varying levels of silent shock.
Bridget observes the 7th princess's endurance, noting that Eve has managed to last a long time.
Bridget reminds the emperor that the people of the slums are also subjects of the empire.
A bead of sweat forms on Eve's face as she nervously wonders what else her sister planned.
Bridget asks the emperor to listen to a way for the poor to become decent subjects through migration.
The plan involves low-interest housing and labor station registration to allow the poor to pay off debt monthly.
The emperor looks intrigued and asks about providing jobs and housing through labor station enrollment.
Bridget explains the subjects will do their duty and the emperor agrees it is a good way.
Eve gazes back with a look of deep skepticism, questioning if the plan is truly good.
Dark narration explains that once registered, subjects cannot avoid taxes, becoming walking money for defense roles.
Bridget looks back at her sister while Eve suddenly breaks the silence with a firm rejection.
Eve looks directly at the emperor and declares that the residents of the slum will refuse to move. Tension crackles between Bridget's smirk, the emperor's stern gaze, and Eve's defiant and unwavering expression.
Looking firm, Eve reiterates that the residents of the slums will reject the proposed migration.
A heavy silence falls over the entire grand room as the imperial family processes Eve's bold defiance.
Bridget maintains a calm and challenging smirk as she tells her younger sister to keep talking.
Eve stares back with a blank expression, preparing her next counter-argument against her sister's scheme.
Eve asks why the subjects would obediently accept playing the role of a barricade in the south.
The emperor listens with a dark and serious expression as Bridget continues to watch her sister's performance.
Eve warns that the situation will worsen if the Imperial Guards are sent to force the migration.
Images of poor subjects being herded and imprisoned reflect the grim reality of forced Imperial relocation.
Eve concludes her warning by stating that her father's standing will drop uncontrollably if he proceeds.
The teacup sits alone on the table during the oppressive and quiet aftermath of Eve's speech.
The emperor sits with his arms crossed, his expression showing a mixture of thought and deep irritation. Eve sits with her hands clasped tightly, her expression showing her internal focus and royal determination.
A memory shows the emperor looking exhausted and stressed while managing the heavy burdens of the throne.
Eve lowers her gaze, reflecting that the current situation is different from her previous life.
The emperor turns toward his daughter and asks exactly what she thinks they should do instead.
Bridget smirks and asks if Eve is suggesting that the best move is doing no reclamation at all.
Bridget thinks her sister is trapped while Eve sits in silence before the gathering of royals.
A single speech bubble containing a flat rejection rings out across the dark and silent room.
Close-up of Bridget sipping her tea, her gaze shifting as the conversation takes an unexpected turn. Facing her father, Eve confidently proposes an alternative to the controversial imperial migration plan.
Above the town, Eve emphasizes that the safety of the residents is the most important thing.
Eve suggests securing military strength even without building combat facilities or appointing specific troops.
Eve proposes arranging Imperial Guard housing at the outskirts of the developing district.
The Emperor and Bridget stare at Eve in total shock following her bold suggestion.
Eve explains that 10% of the Imperial Guards could stay as an off-duty regime.
The Emperor strokes his beard, finding the method proposed by Eve to be quite interesting. The Emperor smiles, admitting the plan doesn't seem bad after listening to her reasoning.
The Emperor points out the palace was already building houses for Bridget's plan anyway.
The Emperor praises Eve for her excellence while she responds with humble modesty.
Bridget's expression turns cold and shadowed as she watches her sister's sudden success.
Looking surprised, Bridget remarks how unexpected Eve's performance is during this tense political meeting.
Bridget questions building private houses for knights in a place like the slums.
Eve realizes her sister is attempting to sound her out for hidden motives again. Eve asks if honor is more important than the basic dignity of the homunculi. A caricature shows the Emperor looking incredibly pleased and happy with the political discussion.
Bridget notes that her younger sister has turned into quite a princess lately. Eve thanks her sister while privately noting Bridget's obsession with honor is useful.
Illustrations depict the fundamental needs of food, clothing, and shelter for all living people.
Narrative text confirms that this new plan grants the homunculi their essential basic rights.
Bridget clenches her hands in silent fury while Michaelis watches from the background.
The Emperor expresses his intention to listen to many opinions on his current business.
Eve politely agrees to her father's request while maintaining her elegant royal composure. Eve politely sees her father and sisters off as they depart from her room.
Once the room is empty, Eve flops onto her sofa in complete physical exhaustion.
Michaelis notes she earned basic rights while Eve calls out his name from the couch. Smiling warmly, Eve tells Michaelis that he understood her intentions perfectly, as always. In chibi form, Eve asks Michaelis about the reactions of the other personal knights. Michaelis reports that one of the knights didn't seem to watch it. Michaelis notes 2 knights seemed resigned while the last one offered a smile.
Eve wonders who would smile at the news while looking at her personal knight.
The narrative confirms that the smiling knight is the 3rd princess's personal protector, Elijah.
Eve reflects that Sir Hallstein is an unusual and somewhat suspicious homunculus knight.
A maid informs the princess that Sir Hallstein has returned for a specific reason.
The maid explains the knight is searching for a ribbon dropped by the 3rd princess. Eve tells the maid to let him in, deciding to overlook his social crudeness. Surrounded by flowers, Elijah Hallstein offers a charming greeting to the 7th princess.
Eve tells the knight to check for the ribbon and leave her presence quickly. Elijah asks for an open mind as he searches to prevent any further suspicion.
Smirking, Elijah admits he likely saw incorrectly and decides to end his superficial search.
Elijah asks Her Highness to forgive his rudeness as he prepares to depart.
Offering his gloved hand, Elijah announces that he will be leaving the room now. Elijah extends his hand while Michaelis watches the interaction with a dark, silent glare. Reaching out, Eve mentally curses the tedious etiquette required for this formal interaction. Elijah gently takes the princess's hand and bows his head to perform a kiss.
The knight presses his lips to the princess's hand in a standard royal greeting.
Elijah performs the kiss while Michaelis stands behind Eve with a look of rage.
Eve looks at the knight with an expression of deep, visible social discomfort and disgust.
Michaelis' face is shadowed with intense anger as he watches the knight's bold actions.
Elijah offers a wide, smug grin while surrounded by blooming yellow roses and light. Cover art featuring the blonde 7th princess and her black-haired knight, Michaelis, amidst roses. Princess Eve reacts with visible shock as a knight's bold, unasked-for gesture startles her.
Elijah Hallstein apologizes if he was offensive, claiming it is an honor to kiss her hand.
Eve pulls away with a disgusted groan while Michaelis stands tensely in the background. Elijah Hallstein halts at the doorway, preparing to leave the princess's chamber after the encounter. Offering a final, mocking smirk, Elijah looks back at the 7th princess before departing completely. A loud bang echoes through the room as the door shuts, leaving the pair alone. Michaelis expresses intense annoyance, muttering that he should have twisted the knight's wrist.
Eve wipes her hand, noting that one cannot mess with Bridget's direct personal knight.
Michaelis asks if Eve thinks the knight acted alone or was following specific instructions.
Eve reflects on her sister Betty, wondering if this was a deliberate attempt to offend her.
Narration explains that Elijah sought Bridget's attention because she is a strong candidate for crown princess.
Eve reflects on Elijah's opportunistic nature and is disgusted by his attempt to flirt with her.
Eve notes that any error in their conduct might lead to a massive social misunderstanding. Michaelis observes that it was quite bold for a personal knight to ask to kiss her hand. Eve laughs awkwardly, recalling that most imperial families viewed the homunculi merely as usable objects.
Eve reassures Michaelis that she doesn't intend to make such requests, so he needn't worry.
Michaelis smiles and asks if she is the one applying for a special request from him.
Eve notes that Michaelis will receive many applications as long as he is her knight.
Lost in her own thoughts, Eve considers her next political move while Michaelis watches her.
Michaelis sweats slightly, admitting to himself that he was just kidding about his previous comment.
Michaelis states that he must prepare himself as he has no intention of accepting other requests. Turning toward each other, the pair prepares for what they know will be an inevitable fight.
With absolute resolve in her eyes, Princess Eve emphasizes that they absolutely must win.
Michaelis listens with stoic loyalty, his expression hardening as he absorbs the weight of her words.
Eve declares that Michaelis cannot be taken away and she will never give him to another.
A rare and genuine smile lights up Eve's face, momentarily softening the tense atmosphere.
Michaelis looks away in silence, processing the princess's fierce and possessive declaration of loyalty.
A close-up of the knight's eye reveals a flicker of realization regarding his own deep-seated feelings. A soft breeze flows through the open window, marking a transition in the day's events.
Michaelis reflects on his status, feeling genuinely glad that he was imprinted by the 7th princess.
Following their community service, townspeople wave a fond goodbye to the princess and her met. Eve notes that Alvin Redman was right to advise her to wear comfortable clothes for labor.
Smiling at her knight, Eve remarks that she didn't expect Michaelis to handle children so well.
Eve's feet hesitate on the road as she considers taking a detour through the city streets. Eve tells Michaelis she's been thinking and feels it would be a shame to return now. Gazing at the lively city, Eve suggests they look around since a festival is being held.
The scene shifts to a bustling market area filled with vendors selling fresh fruit and goods.
Michaelis reacts with a visible blush, clearly caught off guard by the princess's casual suggestion.
In a humorous chibi panel, Michaelis agrees to the detour if it is what the princess wishes.
Footsteps echo as the two move further into the city, away from their official royal duties. Eve asks Michaelis if he intends to keep calling her princess even while on the street.
Michaelis reacts with a blank and flustered expression to the princess's unexpected social request.
Michaelis asks what he should call her instead if he is to avoid her official title. Looking back at him, she simply says her name is Eve, offering him her first name.
Michaelis stares in utter disbelief at the request to address his masters so intimately in public.
Eve glows with excitement, urging Michaelis to hurry up and call her by her name. Looking directly at her with a softened expression, Michaelis slowly and softly whispers the name Eve.
A man in an ornate white and gold uniform whispers her name in a dark vision.
Eve's eye reflects sudden shock as the atmosphere shifts abruptly to a more serious tone. Michaelis tentatively tests out using his master's first name as they walk together through the town.
Eve smiles warmly, encouraging Michaelis to continue addressing her by her name while they are out.
Sunlight bathes the town's festive banners and architecture, signaling a shift to the lively celebration.
Amidst the festival's cheer, the princess pauses to admire the delicate scent of a small flower.
Eve playfully offers a local snap to her knight, who takes a bite while looking flustered. A boisterous announcer calls for the townspeople's attention, inviting everyone to witness a grand theater performance.
The promoter promises a spectacular solo performance by their best singer, sparking the curiosity of onlookers. Captivated by the announcement, Eve suggests to Michaelis that they go see the performance together.
The vibrant mood darkens as they stumble upon a quiet, shadowed alleyway hidden between town buildings.
A sudden, sharp cry of defiance rings out, demanding that someone step out of the way.
A heavy leather boot stomps into the dirt, emphasizing the aggressive nature of the ongoing confrontation.
In the secluded alley, a woman with long dark hair reacts with fierce resistance to someone.
Startled by each other's presence, the dark-haired woman and the princess share a moment of shock.
A physical struggle ensues as the woman continues to fight against being restrained in the alley.
Dramatic intensity fills the air during a series of close-ups showing the characters' wide-eyed mutual surprise.
The confrontation ends with the dark-haired woman sitting on the ground, looking disheveled and deeply upset.
Michaelis keeps a protective hold on Eve's shoulder as they survey the distressed woman before them.
Sitting defeated in the dirt, the woman looks up and wonders aloud about the stranger's identity.
A man yells from a distance that she dug her own grave, identifying her as Ramona.
A radiant vision appears of Ramona as a famous, celebrated singer beloved throughout the imperial capital.
Eve realizes she recognizes the woman from her future memories of a legendary recording golem.
Recognizing the singer in her unknown past, Eve politely approaches the dejected woman to offer assistance. Ramona looks up with tear-filled eyes, her expression reflecting a painful mix of misery and shock.
The singer abruptly stands up, declaring the situation to be impossible despite the princess's kind approach.
The scene shifts to the theater stage where a replacement singer performs for a gathered crowd. Ramona looks on from the shadows, bitterly stating that the stage was rightfully supposed to be hers.
Crushing disappointment causes the talented singer to slump forward, her spirit momentarily broken by the loss.
Ramona explodes in a fit of rage, loudly cursing the theater company for their unfair treatment.
Eve asks if something is wrong while Ramona continues to sob uncontrollably over her professional ruin.
With a kind and supportive smile, the princess reaches out and offers Ramona a clean handkerchief.
Ramona stares at the offered cloth, her sniffles slowing as she processes the stranger's sudden kindness.
The singer accepts the handkerchief and loudly blows her nose, beginning to vent her pent-up emotions.
Standing amidst a floral background, the woman finally introduces herself to the princess as Ramona Lund.
Ramona explains she was removed from the stage because she rejected the company head's corrupt son.
Sobbing about the unfairness, Ramona hugs Eve tightly while explaining she was replaced for refusing romance.
The princess remains frozen in surprise, clearly flustered by the singer's sudden display of physical affection.
Michaelis finds the action impertinent, but Eve gently stops him from intervening in the woman's grief.
Eve reflects on the hidden struggles Ramona must have faced before becoming a renowned imperial legend. The princess offers comfort by patting Ramona's back as the singer continues to cry into her shoulder.
Ramona pulls away, using the princess's handkerchief to wipe away the last of her bitter tears.
Eve asks if she has calmed down a little, and the singer softly confirms she is better.
Ramona declares that according to her people's pride, she must find a way to repay the help. Eve considers her predicament, realizing she must keep her true royal identity a secret for now.
Ramona looks down with a heavy heart, mentioning that there is a more pressing concern at hand. Noticing the singer's lingering distress, Eve insists that it seems like Ramona still needs more help.
Ramona tells her not to worry, claiming that such unfair situations happen often and she is fine.
The princess looks directly at her and suggests that direct aid might be better than simple consolation.
Ramona shakes her head, insisting that the problem is not something the princess can possibly help with.
Eve offers a serene and confident smile, hinting that she possesses more power than she appears. A future vision depicts Ramona singing gloriously on stage, finally fulfilling her destiny under a sunset sky.
Onlookers at the festival express shock and confusion upon seeing Ramona return to the theater stage.
Michaelis asks the princess why she is going to such great lengths for someone she just met.
Eve hands a heavy bag of gold to the company head, declaring that the royal family sponsors artists.
Michaelis questions how Eve knew the singer was talented before hearing her, catching the princess off guard.
Eve nervously claims her gut feeling is never wrong, while Michaelis remains skeptical of her sudden foresight.
The announcer introduces Ramona Lund to the stage for a final performance as the crowd cheers wildly.
Ramona looks out at the audience with a determined and focused expression during her grand return.
Michaelis asks if they should return now, and Eve confirms they should leave the festival area together.
A lingering gaze shows the singer's silent gratitude as the sun begins to set over the town.
A sudden shout from behind causes Eve to stop and look back over her shoulder in surprise. Ramona rushes toward the pair, her red dress flowing as she seeks to speak with her benefactor. Turning around, the princess waits for the singer to approach as the evening light glows around them.
Ramona looks at her with disbelief, asking for confirmation that Eve was truly the one who helped.
Eve responds with a look of mild surprise as she faces the emotional woman she just assisted. Eve confirms her involvement while Ramona expresses total bewilderment at how the princess managed the feat.
Shaking her head, Ramona decides the method is unimportant compared to the magnitude of the selfless deed.
Ramona grabs Eve's hands and urgently demands to know the name of the woman who saved her. Pleading with intense emotion, Ramona insists she cannot let her savior go without knowing her true identity.
Eve stares back at the singer in silence, momentarily unsure how to respond to the desperate request.
A close-up of the princess's eye captures a moment of deep reflection in the warm sunset glow.
Offering a radiant and kind smile, Eve finally reveals her name to the dazed and grateful singer. Stunned by the encounter, Ramona stands in a daze while repeating the name Eve under her breath.
Michaelis interrupts to remind Eve they must leave, and the princess acknowledges their urgent departure.
Eve bids a friendly farewell to Ramona, who bashfully promises they will meet again in the future. As the pair walks away, Ramona watches them from a distance, appearing deeply moved by the encounter. Standing alone under the twilight sky, Ramona whispers the name of her savior one last time. The evening light fades across the town buildings as the festival atmosphere shifts toward a quiet end.
While approaching the carriage, Michaelis admits that the singer's talent was indeed extraordinary as Eve predicted.
Sitting inside the carriage, Eve agrees with a satisfied smile, pleased that her plan for Ramona worked.
Eve leans back with a joyous expression, reflecting on the successful outcome of their detour into town.
A vision of Ramona shows her newfound peace and happiness following the restoration of her singing career.
A woman wearing a plaid hat sips tea while standing beside a blue information panel. The carriage travels through the dark woods as the sound of horses' hooves echoes on the road. Looking into her reflection in the carriage window, Eve contemplates the social risks of her recent actions. A close-up shows hands carefully drafting a secret document using a feather quill and ink. Eve completes a secret agreement with the theater head, who promises to keep their dealings completely hidden. Narrating the political danger, text explains the risks of exposing a civilian's secret ties to the nobility.
Michaelis watches the princess with a serious expression as they continue their journey back to the palace.
Michaelis notes he was usually the only exception to royal rules until today's surprising events. Eve explains using Michaelis as a precedent made the current situation easier and she doesn't hate it.
Michaelis brings up the concept of communication between social classes while the princess listens with curiosity.
Turning the conversation to a personal matter, Michaelis asks the princess if she has any actual friends.
A poignant memory depicts a young Eve playing alone, highlighting her past childhood isolation and loneliness.
Returning to the present, Eve offers a quiet and somewhat hesitant confirmation to her personal knight's question.
Eve reflects on whether her connection with Ramona is genuine or driven by any underlying greed.
Feeling flustered and embarrassed by the personal nature of the conversation, Eve hides her blushing face.
Eve waves her hands dismissively, trying to move past the awkwardness of discussing her social life.
Shifting the focus, Eve asks Michaelis if he ever had any friends of his own before.
Michaelis stares back at her with a stoic and unreadable expression, considering his own past experiences.
The knight begins to answer with a thoughtful murmur as he reflects on the princess's unexpected inquiry.
Princess Eve tilts her head in mild confusion as she processes a puzzling piece of news.
Michaelis enters a dark room as the door creaks open, marking the end of his day. The knight stands in the dim light, his expression unreadable and calm after his long duties.
A silver-haired man lying in bed notes the knight's arrival, remarking that he is finally home.
Recognizing his companion, the silver-haired man murmurs Michael's name as he looks up from the pillow.
Michael notes it has been quite a long time since the other man returned before midnight.
The man in bed clarifies that while it is before midnight, an entire day has passed.
Staring blankly, Michael reflects on the unusual idea of a sleepover occurring somewhere outside the palace.
The silver-haired man remarks that their situation is not too different from being the Emperor's roses.
Looking down with a stern gaze, Michael tells the man in bed that he is being excessive.
The silver-haired man reacts with visible shock, his eyes widening at the bluntness of the knight.
Shifting under the covers, the man in bed softly admits that he likely just misspoke.
Michael thinks to himself that the way the man acts when making mistakes drives him crazy.
Michael draws the curtains closed and tells the silver-haired man to finally take a rest.
The two men settle into their separate beds as the room falls into a quiet blue darkness. Michael remains awake for a moment, staring into the shadows with a look of deep contemplation.
Tucked under the blankets, the silver-haired man prepares for sleep as the light fades completely.
Michael wonders if he ever truly had friends, while the silver-haired man offers only a silent pause. The silver-haired man closes his eyes and simply agrees with the sentiment before drifting off. Silence fills the large bedroom as the moonlight streams through the window onto the sleeping pair. Narration explains the Emperor allowed Eve to join the meeting because of a specific underlying reason.
The Marquis Ramintiello is officially introduced as a member of the elite and secretive Imperial Council.
Princess Eve maintains a graceful and attentive posture while listening to the proceedings of the meeting.
The Emperor proudly announces that the project to emigrate from the exploiting area was Eve's recommendation.
Marquis Ramintiello reacts with visible shock, having previously assumed the brilliant idea belonged to the third princess.
The Marquis notes that all the gentlemen shared his mistaken assumption regarding the project's true origin.
Scattered notes and murmurs fill the air as the council processes the revelation about the princess.
Eve looks on with a knowing expression, mentally noting that her sister Betty is playing tricks.
The Emperor questions why such a rumor existed and firmly clarifies that it was Eve's work.
A secretary notes that her speech will be recorded and delivered to the most influential men.
Eve politely bids the councilmen a safe trip as the formal meeting reaches its final conclusion.
The heavy, ornate doors of the council chamber shut with a final and decisive-sounding thud.
Alone and victorious, Eve smiles brightly as she imagines the shame her sister must now feel.
A symbolic golden rose is snapped in half, representing the fracturing of a carefully constructed facade.
Clutching a pair of shears, Bridget seethes with rage while cursing Ivy and Rose for her political interference.
The council continues their discussion, deciding to use worms to increase the fertility of the soil.
Bridget scoffs at the plan, mockingly asking who could have possibly come up with such an idea.
The Marquis notes he is not the representative and suggests she speak to the creators herself.
Bridget smiles smugly to herself, believing she has already predicted the outcome of the entire situation.
A sharp close-up captures Bridget's eyes narrowing as a sudden realization begins to dawn on her.
Bridget reacts with absolute shock upon being informed that all the ideas were actually the seventh princess's.
The council members realized they were tricked into believing Bridget was the one who provided the contributions.
Feeling a profound sense of humiliation, Bridget reflects that she has never experienced such deep shame.
Deep red wine is poured over a bowl of yellow roses, staining the delicate petals dark.
A knight watches Bridget, thinking that her sudden, ruthless silence is far more terrifying than her yelling. Surrounded by boiling liquid and roses, Bridget demands to know how Eve dared to embarrass her so. Bridget seethes that Eve should have stayed in the corner and played the role of the kind princess.
With a trembling hand, Bridget reaches into the bowl and begins to crush a yellow rose petal.
A violent spray of red liquid covers the background, mirroring the intensity of the princess's boiling fury.
Standing in the shadows, Bridget looks down at her stained hand with an expression of cold, calculated hate.
Eve carefully records her thoughts using a quill while preparing for an upcoming royal event.
The magnificent imperial palace stands tall, serving as the grand setting for the day's proceedings.
A sharp knock echoes against the ornate doors, signaling a guest's arrival at the princess's quarters. Michael enters the room and offers a respectful, formal greeting to the 7th princess. Eve invites Michael to join her for tea, mentioning she wanted to talk since it's been a while. The knight pauses momentarily, focused and attentive to his master's unexpected request for a personal conversation.
Eve offers a gentle smile after being complimented on her exquisite attire for the day's tea party.
A maid mentions servants take pride in a beautiful master, while Eve invites Michael to sit.
The maid presents a special herbal tea brewed from plants grown on the balcony's private garden.
The group enjoys the high-quality tea, noting that it lives up to the princess's high standards.
A silent exchange of looks occurs between the knight and the princess during the quiet tea service.
Eve breaks the silence with a light-hearted laugh, her cheerful mood brightening the elegant room.
Michael asks if there is an important palace party today since he was unaware of the schedule.
The maid clarifies that the upcoming event is the princess's regular periodic tea party.
While appearing to be a political gathering, the princess's tea party often hides their true intentions.
The gathering serves as an unofficial venue where the royal sisters exchange private and esoteric interests.
The princesses frequently spend their time critiquing and reviewing the performance of their various bodyguard knights.
Traditionally, it is a tacit rule for princesses not to bring their knights to these gatherings.
Eve sips her tea while reflecting on how the princesses often discuss scandalous topics during meetings.
Thinking about the rowdy and overwhelming nature of her sister's conversations makes the princess feel exhausted.
Alvin apologizes for his oversight and failing to report the day's schedule to the head knight.
Michael stares at the princess while she awkwardly drinks her tea, feeling the weight of the silence. Eve instructs Michael to return to his duties once he finishes his tea, attempting to change subjects.
Soft light illuminates Michael's face as he processes the princess's command with his usual stoicism.
Looking directly at her, Michael reassures Eve that she can call for him at any time.
Walking through the hallway, Eve wonders why she feels an unusual sense of seriousness and unease today.
Eve worries that Betty will be furious about the plan to relocate the poor and seek revenge.
Turning to her servants, Eve confirms that the secret task she previously assigned is still being handled.
Alvin pledges his absolute loyalty, promising to inform her immediately if any trouble befalls her personal knight.
Eve urges them to remain extra vigilant today while the servant promises to follow her orders.
Alvin departs to carry out his instructions, leaving the princess to prepare for the social gauntlet.
Nervousness flickers in Eve's eyes as she hopes the day proceeds without any major unexpected incidents.
Standing before the grand entrance, the princess decides it is finally time to enter the gathering.
Sharp flashes of clashing steel signal that training has commenced within the Imperial Knights arena.
Michael stands in the center of the training grounds, observing the other knights with a critical eye.
A red-haired knight prepares for a strike while reflecting on the variety of unique individual combat styles.
Training continues with the warning that a knight must never lose focus on their surroundings during combat.
Michael remains stoic as Sylvestian approaches him amidst the sounds of sparring knights in the background.
Addressing the silver-haired knight by name, Michael prepares to engage in a conversation about their training.
Sylvestian questions Michael's assumptions regarding his training habits, sparking a deeper discussion about their combat roles.
Michael notes that homunculi are often perceived as being unable to cooperate effectively with one another.
The traditional practice of training bodyguard knights one-on-one proves to be a surprising and inefficient method.
Michael points out the concerning decline in magic crystal mining to Sylvestian, noting its impact on resources.
Legend states magic crystals only appear after the destructive process of slaying the massive demon dragon.
Sylvestian listens as Michael explains that even the palace guard knights were forced into the recent conflict.
Michael reflects on the heavy casualties among homunculi during previous battles against the formidable demon dragon.
Sylvestian remains silent, his unreadable expression suggesting he is deeply considering the weight of Michael's words. Sensing a shift in the atmosphere, Sylvestian asks what is bothering Michael about their current situation.
Michael stares forward, his eyes reflecting a growing sense of duty and internal conflict.
Darkness shadows Michael's features as he contemplates the heavy price of loyalty in the coming struggles.
The silver-haired knight bids Michaelis a brief and casual farewell as their daily training session concludes.
Michaelis stands alone in the middle of the courtyard, his expression unreadable and stoic as usual.
Two armored knights approach Michaelis from behind while walking across the sunlit training grounds of the palace. The blue-haired knight offers an informal and casual greeting to catch the attention of the head knight. Michaelis turns around with a look of mild confusion as he recognizes the identity of the newcomers.
The blue-haired man refuses to provide any details and commands Michaelis to follow him without saying anything.
A close-up of the knight's stern and focused gaze underscores the serious nature of the mysterious summons.
Michaelis wonders if the involvement of royalty is the reason behind this sudden and forceful request for attendance.
Surrounded by the two silent messengers, Michaelis closes his eyes and chooses to cooperate with the escort.
Sunlight flickers through the overhead trees, casting long and dappled shadows on the stone pathway they travel.
The path leads into a dense and isolated forest, far removed from the primary activities of the palace.
Narration explains that someone specifically chose the time of the princess's tea party to trap the knight.
Meanwhile, Eve enjoys a lavish tea session with her sisters, completely unaware of her knight's current situation.
Michaelis observes that the density of the windproof forest makes it impossible to detect any nearby surveillance columns.
Michaelis laments the total absence of sound in the woods while blaming his own negligence for this trap.
Stylized silhouettes depict the noble figures and their knights, representing the complex power struggles within the imperial court.
Michaelis contemplates that perhaps confronting this direct challenge is better than continuing to avoid his royal enemies.
Eve sips her tea while reflecting on the necessity of showing her anger to protect her loyal subordinates.
A shadowy side profile of Michaelis captures his internal focus as he prepares for the coming royal confrontation.
Princess Stephanie and Prince Derek wait in a forest clearing, flanked by their own personal bodyguard knights.
The sixth princess, Stephanie Hadalamide, is officially introduced as she prepares to confront the seventh princess's knight. Prince Derek offers a calm smile while advising his visibly irritated sister to maintain her composure for now.
Derek remarks that the third princess will be the future crown princess and should be treated accordingly well.
Michaelis deduces that the royalty are seeking revenge due to the resentment over the recent slum migration policy.
The knights report their success, prompting Stephanie to dismiss them so she can speak with Michaelis alone.
Stephanie stares down with a look of intense annoyance, her fan held tightly against her chest in frustration.
Michaelis realizes that the royal siblings used their personal knights specifically to lure him out to this forest.
Michaelis kneels and offers a formal greeting to the sixth prince and princess while stating his full name.
Prince Derek delivers a sharp and cold command, forbidding Michaelis from standing up until he is given permission.
Riveter Berman and Snowrit Wind are introduced as the respective personal knights of the sixth princess and prince.
A bead of sweat rolls down Michaelis' face as he endures the heavy and oppressive pressure of royalty.
Riveter and Snowret stand behind their masters, looking down at Michaelis with a cold and detached intensity.
Michaelis remains in his submissive kneeling position while waiting for the royal siblings to continue their interrogation.
Snoret leans forward and looks Michaelis in the eye with a gaze that suggests a hidden, malicious intent.
Michaelis reflects on the absolute nature of the orders issued by both the emperor and his own mistress.
Snowret responds with a cheerful and chilling confirmation to a silent command given by the princess behind her.
The two personal knights suddenly force Michaelis down, pinning him to the ground with their combined physical strength. A small stain of red liquid pools on the pebbles beneath the knight's knee during the forced restraint.
Stephanie watches the display of physical dominance with a calm, analytical, and completely remorseless expression of golden eyes.
Stephanie extends her closed fan toward Michaelis' throat, physically threatening him while he is pinned to the floor.
The princess asks Michaelis if he has any understanding of why he was summoned to this isolated location.
Michaelis responds with a curt denial, maintaining his stoicism even with the princess's fan pressed against his neck.
The scene shifts back to the palace where rumors about Eve's difficulty training her own knight are spreading.
Whispers regarding the seventh princess's lack of control over her subordinate echo through the corridors of the palace.
Stephanie hides her smile behind her fan while pondering the rumor she intends to use against her sister. Michaelis vows to correct his behavior immediately, attempting to defuse the situation and protect Eve's political reputation. A tight close-up focuses on the princess's dress, highlighting the tense and silent atmosphere of the forest meeting.
Stephanie offers a wide and menacing grin as she realizes she has found a weakness in Michaelis' resolve.
The princess points out that Michaelis has served Eve for a month without spending a single night together.
Stephanie asks Michaelis if such a distant relationship between a mistress and her knight is considered morally wrong.
Stephanie emphasizes that a personal knight's only duty is to serve their master faithfully.
Stephanie mocks Michaelis, suggesting his failure to satisfy his master is why he's sent back.
Michaelis reflects on how Princess Eve has always treated him as more than a tool.
Derek looks down with a smug grin, questioning if Michaelis knows why he's unqualified.
The royals mock Michaelis as a defective homunculus who has no place within the palace. A legal document representing the Homunculus Control Act appears as a threat for failing duties.
Floating text declares that any personal knight failing their duty deserves a harsh demotion.
Stephanie agrees with Derek's cruel plan while they both hide behind fans with dark expressions.
Derek suggests giving Michaelis a reason to live while noting Eve can't stand drama.
The royals decide that maiming Michaelis is an appropriate way to teach him a lesson.
Michaelis remains pinned by the two knights as the royal siblings watch him with malice.
A close-up captures Michaelis's restrained hand as he endures the humiliating physical pressure.
Michaelis remains stoic, his eyes glowing with intensity as he sweats under the heavy atmospheric pressure.
Stephanie calls upon her knights, Riveter and Snowret, to escalate the confrontation against Michaelis.
Riveter stands ready in his red uniform, his expression cold as he prepares to act.
Snoret draws her sword slightly, her sharp gaze fixed on the kneeling Michaelis in the forest.
Michaelis considers drawing his own sword but hesitates, fearing the political consequences of resisting royalty.
A close-up shows Michaelis's trembling hand near his weapon as he weighs his survival options.
Michaelis worries that resisting will lead to false accusations and a miserable end for him.
Shadows deepen around Michaelis as he remains motionless, the sounds of the forest fading away.
The clearing remains tense as Michaelis is surrounded by the royals and their personal knights. Stephanie and Derek share a sinister look, enjoying their position of power over Eve's knight.
Riveter and Snowret maintain their focused, remorseless gazes as they wait for their next command.
Michaelis looks up with a resolute expression, preparing himself for the struggle that lies ahead.
A determined thought bubble appears, signaling Michaelis' decision to fight for his own survival.
Promotional art for the series Translator appears, featuring a girl among purple flowering vines.
The Grand Imperial Palace stands under a bright sky, hosting the regular royal tea party. The royal sisters are seated around a massive table for their official periodic tea gathering.
A princess with an elegant updo and black earrings smiles during the tense social event.
Narration introduces Princesses Roxandra and Corolla as they participate in the ongoing royal meeting.
Eve smiles politely while mentally noting the absurdity of the bed problem rumors spreading around.
Historical context explains the dark tradition of using homunculi as legal slaves for royal bedrooms.
Eve sits quietly, reflecting on her internal goal to dismantle the exploitative knight system.
Princess Hesia questions if Eve's knight is problematic, but Eve firmly denies any such issues.
Princess Azel sips her tea while labeling Eve's treatment of her knight as an experiment.
Azel warns Eve that her unusual methods might cause chaos within the palace's social structure.
Azel suggests that if Eve is already satisfied, the knight's presence at night is unnecessary.
A princess with a blue jewel smiles condescendingly, suggesting Eve needs to teach her subordinate.
Eve listens in silence, her expression unreadable as she endures the barbs of her sisters.
Tension fills the room as Eve remains silent, the social pressure from the princess is mounting. A princess continues her mocking commentary with a sharp, remorseless smile directed at the seventh princess.
Eve grips her teacup as her sibling dismisses her previous insults as a mere joke.
Eve thanks her sisters for their concern, but asserts she will handle her own knight.
Eve states that Agneto has remained within his professional scope, ending the discussion on discipline.
The princesses sit in a momentary silence as Eve firmly sets her boundaries at the table.
Two sisters remark on how unusual it is for Betty's name to be mentioned today.
A princess gracefully shifts the conversation toward the topic of increasing magic stone mining efforts.
Eve's expression shifts to one of confusion and suspicion as the new topic is introduced.
A sudden and jarring beep sound effect cuts through the air, signaling an urgent event.
Eve's eyes widen with a flash of alarm as she senses something has gone wrong.
Looking visibly tense, Eve reacts to the sound of Hugh's briefing whistle.
Michaelis wonders if the enemy's true target was actually Michael all along. Michaelis contemplates the future homunculus king, noting that mere kindness is not enough. Eve realizes she must find Michael immediately to prevent a disaster.
The silhouettes of the princesses engage in hushed, suspicious gossip.
Eve notices that her sisters are desperately trying to stall for time.
Michaelis suspects that Betty is the one responsible for the current situation.
Eve looks skeptical as she considers the princess's true motives.
A sharp realization dawns on Eve as she remains seated at the table.
The tea party continues in the grand hall under the bright sunlight. Eve mutters quietly to herself while holding her blue and white teacup.
Princess Corolla makes a bizarre comment regarding the lives of 1,000 homunculi.
Corolla appears dazed and questions what she just said to her sisters.
A blonde princess smiles with a cunning and calculated look in her eye.
Eve sips her tea while focusing intensely on her sister's reactions.
A princess reacts with sudden shock as Eve watches her closely.
The blue-haired princess springs up in alarm while Eve notes it is late.
A princess collapses onto the table, prompting Eve to call out in concern.
The sisters react in shock as their companion suddenly slumps over. Eve stands up quickly and turns her attention toward the exit.
Eve declares that the tea party should end immediately following the collapse.
The remaining princesses watch Eve with a mix of confusion and suspicion.
Eve politely excuses herself, claiming she has urgent business to attend to.
Eve rushes out of the room while her sister remains unconscious.
Princess Hesia points out that Eve is heading in the wrong direction.
Eve grips the balcony railing firmly as she prepares to take a shortcut. Eve leaps from the high balcony to save valuable time.
Eve runs toward her knight, mentally urging Michael to wait for her.
Michaelis waits as Eve frantically hopes to reach him in time.
The Grand Imperial Palace stands tall against a clear blue sky.
The royal sisters are seated around a massive table for their gathering.
Eve prepares herself for the social gauntlet of the periodic tea party.
Roxandra Hadelamid asks Eve if she has enjoyed the knight's night service.
Corolla Hadelamid says they stepped up because Eve doesn't use her night properly.
Eve laughs awkwardly, surprised that her sisters are discussing bedroom affairs outright.
The royal sisters share a laugh over their scandalous and mocking gossip.
Eve vows to dismantle the personal knight system once she becomes crown princess.
Hessia Hadelamid asks if there is a defect with Eve's homunculus. Isel Hadelamid asks Eve if she has already completed the necessary inspection.
Eve chooses not to tell the truth to avoid causing another fuss.
Isel argues that Eve wouldn't send him back if she truly liked him.
A princess sets her cup down with a sharp click during the violence.
Corolla offers to educate the knight for Eve if she is struggling.
Eve's expression turns cold and serious at the suggestion of interference.
Grinning politely, Eve asserts she will handle her personal knight her own way. Eve warns that no one should discuss his education as long as he is dignified.
The princesses agree to change the subject after hearing Eve's firm response.
A loud beep rings out, signaling a sudden and urgent event.
Eve realizes that her sisters are trying hard to stall for time. Eve's eyes narrow as she realizes she is walking into a trap.
Stephanie expresses her absolute certainty that Betty is the one responsible for the current situation.
Chibi Eve rests her chin in her hand while deep in thought about her sisters. Eve observes her sisters and concludes that her two eldest siblings are likely not accomplices.
The sixth princess continues to lead the conversation while casually gesturing during the tea gathering.
Two other royal sisters participate in the social event with lighthearted smiles and elegant postures.
Eve sips her tea silently while focusing intensely on her own internal plans and suspicions.
A princess speaks about homunculus lives being expendable while her companion expresses a confused hesitation.
The blonde princess feels a sudden moment of disorientation and questions where she was mid-sentence.
Eve maintains a steady gaze while drinking her tea, carefully observing her sister's strange behavior. Stephanie springs from her seat in alarm as Eve notes that their realization is late.
A princess suddenly collapses face down onto the tea table, prompting a cry of shock from Hessia.
Hessia looks down at her unconscious sister with a gaze filled with confusion and concern.
The tea party descends into total chaos as multiple princesses simultaneously slump over their seats.
Eve stands up from her chair with a focused and cold expression, ignoring the fainting.
Eve announces that it is best for their routine tea gathering to reach an end.
Hessia points out that Eve is heading in the opposite direction of the main doors.
Eve leaps from the high balcony railing to reach her destination with the utmost speed.
After landing, Eve justifies her shortcut by stating she is in far too much hurry.
Michaelis stares forward with an intense and stoic gaze as he faces his impending trial.
A mental plea from Eve urges Michaelis to wait for her as she rushes through.
Michaelis tightens his grip on his sword hilt while feeling the mounting pressure of combat.
The enemy knights close in on Michaelis as their footsteps signal an immediate and dangerous confrontation.
Blood stains the knight's uniform while a voice commands him to obey the orders given.
A close-up captures a sinister smile that reflects the malicious intent behind the forest trap.
Eve questions the shocked royal siblings while they react with visible alarm to her sudden move.
Eve offers a gentle and relieved smile, signaling a momentary victory in her ongoing struggle.
A lone crow flies over the tall trees of the forest where the secret meeting occurs. Michaelis remains surrounded by the personal knights of the sixth princess and prince in the clearing.
Michaelis looks away with a troubled and resigned expression, accepting the heavy weight of his fate. Michaelis curses his inability to draw his weapon while admitting he desperately misses his princess.
Riveter reluctantly suggests that losing an arm is a better alternative than a much worse fate.
Michaelis swallows hard as his eyes reflect the immense and oppressive pressure of the royal presence.
Narration describes the tragic fate of being sacrificed or dragged to work in magic mines.
Michaelis clenches his sword hilt while weighing the dangerous option of escaping through violent resistance.
A blood-spattered guillotine visualizes the painful execution that follows any act of defiance against royalty. Despite the horrible choices, Michaelis decides that fighting back allows him to release his internal anger.
Michaelis reflects on his brainwashing that prevents him from ever harming members of the imperial family.
The enemy knights stand ready to act while Stephanie and Derek watch the scene unfold. A silhouette of Eve highlights the heavy responsibility she will bear for any major incident. Michaelis lets his sword fall to the ground, choosing to drop his weapon in submission.
Michaelis extends his arm toward his captors and invites them to do whatever they desire. A side profile of Michaelis captures his stoic acceptance of the coming physical maiming and pain.
Riveter watches the head knight with a solemn and steady gaze, processing Michaelis' unexpected resolve.
Michaelis questions if the knight is going to proceed with the task he was ordered.
Riveter approaches Michaelis and promises to perform the maiming with a quick and efficient strike. The enemy knight raises his heavy steel blade high, preparing to sever Michaelis' outstretched left arm.
Close-up panels of Michaelis' eyes show his silent and resolute acceptance of the imminent strike.
Michaelis stands still as the sharp sword blade is swung directly toward his vulnerable arm.
Riveter suddenly freezes mid-swing as the jarring sound of a crack echoes through the forest.
Stephanie and Derek react with visible shock and alarm as something interrupts their cruel plan. A brilliant blue magic barrier shatters into fragments as a large crack forms. Eve stands with her hand outstretched after successfully breaking through the magical forest barrier.
A close-up of Eve's face captures her arrival as someone gaffes her name.
Eve walks into the clearing, startling the royal siblings and their personal night guards. Riveter Berman stares in disbelief as the seventh princess interrupts their cruel forest interrogation. Michaelis looks up with a weary expression as his mistress finally reaches the clearing. Staring forward with intense and cold eyes, Eve demands to know how they dare.
Riveter and Snowrat offer formal greetings to Eve while she observes the scene's tension.
Michaelis watches his princess in silence, mentally questioning her sudden appearance in this location.
Eve turns her head with a sharp, analytical gaze toward her older royal siblings. Looking exhausted and dirtied, Michaelis stares up at Eve with a mix of resignation.
Close-up panels show the dirt on Michaelis' clothes and the bloodstains on his pants.
Michaelis' discarded sword lies on the pebbles, reflecting the sunlight in the quiet clearing.
Eve reflects on the dangerous moment she arrived and the fate Michaelis almost suffered.
The sixth princess and prince flinch in visible fear as Eve turns toward them. Eve states that she has at least a loose understanding of the current situation. Eve notes that her siblings chose a shady place to harass her personal knight. Stephanie and Derek claim they were merely giving the seventh princess's knight a lesson. Eve agrees to the lesson but tells them to look at their methods. Eve points out the rough pebbles chosen specifically to make Michaelis deliver his greetings. Eve notes mana was used while Michaelis didn't even draw his sword during combat. Stephanie stammers while trying to explain the situation, her face pale with mounting nervousness. Eve maintains a steady, intimidating gaze while her sister fails to find a valid excuse. Eve accuses her siblings of planning to falsely charge Michaelis with attempted royal assassination. Eve asks how a knight could remove his sword while Michaelis offers his apologies.
A close-up shows Eve's hands as she returns the weapon to her loyal knight.
Eve reflects on the constant disturbances within the palace and the need to face them.
Tight close-up focus on Eve's eyes, shimmering with a mix of determination and anger.
Eve commands Michaelis to suppress the two knights who dared to aim swords of her. The royal siblings react with total shock and gulp as Eve escalates the confrontation. Michaelis smirks and finally draws his sword, ready to follow his princess's aggressive order. Eve looks back with a cold smile while her siblings flinch in their seats. The clearing shakes from a sudden impact as a loud sound echoes through the woods. Stephanie and Derek look extremely uncomfortable and worried as the power dynamic shifts completely. Holding a broken golem, Eve asks who actually ordered the two royal siblings to act.
Eve specifically asks what Brigitte instructed them to do regarding her personal knight service.
Stephanie confesses that Brigitte claimed Eve's knight was failing his duty to get him expelled.
Flashbacks reveal Brigitte's plan to use slanderous accusations to frame Michaelis for a royal assassination.
Eve remains silent as she listens to the details of the third princess's malicious scheme.
Derek and Stephanie shout that everything was Brigitte's will and they only followed orders. The siblings suggest Eve should punish their knights instead of them to satisfy her anger.
Stephanie and Derek desperately plead for Eve to take her displeasure out on the knights.
Stephanie begs Eve not to report this to the newspaper, fearing her marriage will end.
Eve offers a short, mocking laugh at the cowardly behavior of her two royal siblings.
Riveter and Snowrat beg for a pardon while offering to accept any punishment from Eve.
Eve bluntly refuses to grant any pardon, ignoring the knight's desperate pleas for mercy.
A close-up captures Eve's resolute expression as she repeats her refusal to forgive them.
Riveter and Snowrat look on with grim and defeated expressions as Eve remains firm. Eve turns away with a cold and dismissing movement, ending the conversation with her siblings.
Narration observes that the siblings use their own knights as shields after failing to protect them.
Holding a shattered golem, Eve remarks that the knights were merely following orders.
Panels of Wint and Snowrat appear as Eve argues they shouldn't be sacrificial royals. Eve promises to keep today's events a secret despite having recorded the entire encounter. Stephanie and Derek react with shock, having expected their actions to be made public. Maintaining a calm expression, Eve informs her siblings that she has a specific condition. Standing beside Michaelis, Eve directs her focus toward the two royals awaiting her terms. The clearing remains tense as Eve and Michaelis face the kneeling siblings and knights. A loud impact sound resonates through the forest as someone reacts with extreme alarm.
Stephanie and Derek express outrage at the suggestion of apologizing to a homunculus slave.
Michaelis watches Eve with a surprised gaze as she takes a firm defensive stance. With a cold and unyielding expression, Eve demands that her royal siblings apologize immediately.
Stephanie attempts to apologize to Eve while still dismissing the status of her knight.
Eve remains firm, insisting they must offer their apology specifically to the knight Agneto. Stephanie looks away in silent defeat, unable to contest the seventh princess's firm command.
A side profile captures Eve's intense focus as she continues to pressure her siblings.
The siblings grind their teeth in frustration, forced to submit to Eve's overwhelming authority. Stephanie finally offers a short, forced apology for her offensive behavior during the meeting.
Derek apologizes directly to Ignito, expressing hope that they can move past this incident.
Michaelis watches Eve with a softened expression, moved by her defense of his dignity.
Looking stoic once more, Michaelis formally accepts the royal siblings' apology to end it.
Chibi versions of Stephanie and Derek shiver uncontrollably under Eve's intense and icy presence.
Chibi Eve reflects privately that her siblings simply did far too much today.
Eve addresses her siblings one last time, hoping they grasp the gravity of today.
Stephanie and Derek shrink back, realizing the outcome of their trap was completely reversed. Eve turns her attention toward the knight, Wint, who watches her with a calm gaze.
Eve confirms Wint's identity as she prepares to issue a request to the knight.
Wint acknowledges the 7th princess with a respectful bow, accepting her authority in the clearing.
Eve stands gracefully among the trees, her green dress illuminated by the dappled forest sunlight.
Narration expresses regret that such significant magical talent is being utilized for malicious purposes.
Eve reassures Wint that he should not blame himself for today's shameful royal incident.
A rare and genuine smile crosses Eve's face, signaling an end to her cold fury.
Eve commands Wint to open the magical boundary so they may depart the forest.
Magical energy swirls around the clearing as Wint begins to dismantle the forest's barrier.
Eve glances back at Michaelis, signaling for him to follow her as they leave.
Looking back with a gentle expression, Eve tells Agnito that it is time to return.
Michaelis responds with steady loyalty, acknowledging his mistress as they prepare to exit together.
The defeated royal siblings remain behind, looking small and pathetic after their ultimate failure.
Stephanie and Derek tremble with rage, swearing to reclaim their dignity at any cost.
A sudden mess lands squarely on Derek's face, interrupting his silent vow of revenge.
A bird flies away while Derek screams about the bird droppings hitting his eyes. Eve and Michaelis walk together through the forest as the sun shines through the canopy. Close-up panels show Eve in deep thought while Michaelis follows silently behind his princess.
Michaelis suddenly stops moving as Eve halts her progress and turns toward him directly.
The camera looks at Eve from behind Michaelis as she prepares to speak to him. Eve questions why Michaelis chose to drop his sword when she first arrived.
Michaelis explains that by discarding his weapon, he ensured she could escape alone.
Shock registers on Eve's face as she processes the depth of her knight's selflessness.
Michaelis remains perfectly still, his eyes fixed on Eve as he waits for her reaction.
Michaelis asserts that his decision was the best way to handle the dangerous situation. Eve looks down in quiet contemplation while absorbing the weight of her knight's devotion. Eve questions if his choice is best while stating she wants his honest opinion. Michaelis looks away, noting that the princess is already well aware of the truth. Michaelis calls Eve a person of justice while she acknowledges the many palace enemies. Michaelis expresses his desire not to become a hindrance to her future as queen.
Eve tells the knight to accept praise and questions the true nature of loyalty.
Turning toward him, Eve reminds Michaelis of the previous instructions she gave him.
Eve asserts she will use the power of her name to protect him always. Eve insists that protection includes enduring injuries and fighting back when danger arises.
The princess and her knight stand together in the dappled light of the forest.
A Chibi Eve reflects on her lack of power within the walls of the palace.
Determined, Chibi Eve asserts her status as a princess to overcome the unfair treatment.
Michaelis offers his sincere apologies, realizing he has unintentionally offended his princess.
Eve sighs and accepts the apology as she faces her knight in the quiet woods.
A thoughtful close-up captures Eve's face as she contemplates the weight of her words.
Michaelis stares forward with a stoic and unwavering gaze while listening to her.
The knight maintains his serious expression as the conversation continues in the forest. Eve looks on in shock as a sudden physical reaction overcomes the knight. Michaelis drops to his knees while Eve asks what he is doing. Noticing his leg is bleeding again, Eve urgently commands him to stand up. Michaelis addresses her title while Eve insists he must stand if he respects her. A close-up shows Michaelis pursing his lips as he struggles against his physical pain.
Eve warns that disobedience only leads to further injury as she watches over him.
Admitting her defeat in the argument, Eve asks what her knight wishes to say. Michaelis asserts that his actions are not born from a lack of trust in her. The knight explains his sincerity while Eve watches him closely from a short distance.
Eve acknowledges his enthusiasm, but calls her own worry about his abilities arrogant.
A focused close-up captures Eve's eye as she processes the depth of his devotion. Looking at her knight's silhouette, Eve internally questions if this is the real Michael. Eve finally offers her forgiveness while looking at him with a soft expression.
A close-up focus settles on Michaelis' mouth as he begins to speak.
Michaelis expresses his gratitude to the 7th princess for coming to find him. Eve looks at her knight with a gaze full of empathy and growing affection. Michaelis attributes his life to her protection as they stand among the green trees. The knight reaffirms that he is simply keeping his promise to protect her.
Michaelis offers a small smile and decides he must trust her.
Eve clenches her dress while wondering if Michael is truly an honest person.
Eve vows to protect him until the day she finally takes the throne. Michaelis looks up with loyalty, thinking of himself as her personal sword. Eve thinks about dedicating her heart and body to her might.
The scene transitions with the sound of leaves rustling in the quiet forest.
Eve smiles warmly, thinking that her feelings for him are obvious.
Michaelis reflects on how the traitor from his previous life chose him now.
Michaelis wonders if he is doing well after being chosen by her.
Eve reacts with surprise when he addresses her title and calls out to her. A close-up shows the knight reaching for his mistress's hand.
Michaelis kneels and takes Eve's hand with deep respect and reverence. Michaelis leans down to press a soft kiss against her hand. Looking up, Michaelis gazes at Eve with a devoted and calm expression.
Michaelis addresses Eve as his princess with a soft and gentle smile.
Eve looks down at her knight with an expression of deep, quiet affection. Eve offers a warm and gentle smile, finally finding a moment of peace after the chaos.
In a grand room, Eve sits with her loyal maids and Adela to discuss current matters.
Adela mentions the persistent rumors about the 7th princess working during the late hours of night. Adela takes responsibility for failing to monitor the malicious rumors circulating within the imperial palace.
Eve tells Adela that no apology is necessary, though they must eventually confront the slander.
Adela expresses deep regret for forcing the princess to listen to such horrible and insulting words.
The group gathers around the table, united in their desire to protect Eve from further gossip.
Adela suggests that Eve should relax and have dinner in her private bedroom this evening.
Looking toward the night, Adela asks if the princess would like to dine with Mr. Agnito.
Michaelis stands tall and silent, listening to the unexpected suggestion for a private royal dinner.
Eve reacts with genuine surprise as she processes the idea of dining alone with her knight.
Adela clarifies her suggestion, wondering if Eve is comfortable having only Agnito join her for dinner.
Michaelis kneels while questioning the private arrangement, privately wondering if this is an unexpected side quest.
The young servants react with exaggerated shock as they overhear the plan for a private dinner.
Hasia excitedly concludes that Agnito wants to take a bath, much to the knight's visible confusion.
Chibi servants cheerfully drag the bewildered Michaelis away to prepare him for the upcoming evening meal.
Michaelis remains stoic while enduring a bath, simply noting the sensation of being completely wet.
Now clean and dressed in a white shirt, Michaelis marvels at how well the servants cooperate.
Touching his neck, Michaelis asserts his composure by telling himself that he is not actually angry.
Adela opens the grand doors and informs Michaelis that everything is prepared for his private dinner.
Michaelis stares forward with a resolute gaze as he prepares to meet with the 7th princess.
The knight walks through the palace corridors toward the room where his mistress is currently waiting.
A soft sound echoes as the large double doors are closed behind the departing personal knight.
Michaelis focuses intensely on the coming meeting, his eyes reflecting a mix of duty and devotion.
Eve stands by the window in a simple white gown, her hand resting on a chair.
Turning with a soft expression, Eve invites Michael inside to join her for the evening meal.
The pair sits together at a lavishly set table while the sunset glows through the windows.
Close-up views highlight the gourmet food and wine prepared for the princess and her loyal knight.
Looking at the spread, Michaelis remarks to his princess that the prepared meal looks truly delicious.
Eve smiles warmly and suggests that he should join her for dinner more often in the future.
Michaelis accepts her invitation, stating he will join her as long as she desires his company.
Maintaining her gentle demeanor, Eve encourages them to begin their meal in the quiet room.
Chibi Eve giggles while Michaelis feels flustered, questioning the nature of his own internal thoughts.
A sharp clacking sound interrupts the peaceful atmosphere as the conversation shifts towards serious royal matters.
Eve reflects on her plan to eventually ensure that her royal siblings remain obedient to her.
Eve considers the recording golem, deciding it is too early to confront the other princesses directly.
Michaelis questions if the princess still intends to keep the magical golem under their constant supervision.
Eve commands Michaelis to secure the golem within a birdcage so it cannot escape their custody.
Chibi Eve dismisses Michaelis' concerns about the legality of taking royal property for their private use.
The golem struggles against the bars of the cage, emitting metallic sounds as it remains trapped.
Michaelis observes that the current state of affairs cannot continue indefinitely without a major change.
Eve agrees with his assessment, looking thoughtful as she contemplates the weight of her future plans.
Waving her wine glass, Eve mentions she has already considered exactly how to use the golem.
Eve sips her red wine, confident that she will handle the situation when the right time comes.
Eve notes that the tea is ready and suggests it is finally time for them to rest.
Peering from behind a wall, the maids react with surprise to the princess's final command.
The maids offer a polite acknowledgement, accepting the princess's decision to conclude the long day.
Michaelis stares forward, reflecting on the fact that their journey is still in its early stages.
Eve invites Michaelis to speak freely and enjoy some tea now that the servants have departed.
Pouring a fresh cup of tea, Eve brings the long and difficult day to a peaceful end.
Eve closes her eyes with a serene expression, enjoying a rare moment of quiet peace.
Michaelis stands before the princess, looking at her with a steady and devoted royal gaze.
The surface of the tea ripples as the knight observes how clear the water is.
Michaelis lowers his head with a small smile, savoring the calm atmosphere of the room.
Looking up suddenly, the knight acknowledges the princess as she calls out to him directly.
A soft clacking sound fills the silent room as the teacup is set on the table.
Eve sits across from Michaelis, preparing to make a specific request for the evening ahead.
The princess begins to speak, her profile illuminated as she addresses her loyal personal knight.
Michaelis focuses on the princess, waiting to hear the details of her coming evening request. Eve offers a warm smile, her face glowing with a mix of kindness and determination.
The princess asks Michaelis if he will sleep in her room tonight during their dinner. Silence settles over the dinner table as the knight processes the weight of her words.
Michaelis reacts with total shock, questioning the meaning of the princess's surprising and direct invitation. The black-haired man looks away while addressing his mistress, visibly stunned by her unexpected suggestion. Michaelis recalls a past moment of the princess's care, considering the depth of her devotion.
Swallowing hard, the knight privately concludes that the princess feels obligated to provide the service.
Michaelis drinks his tea quickly while the princess asks if the beverage is too hot.
The knight stands up abruptly and addresses the princess with a sudden and intense determination.
Michaelis asserts that he will begin immediately while starting to unfasten the buttons of his shirt.
Confused, the princess asks what he is doing as he requests her specific personal preferences.
Close-up panels highlight the knight's hands as he continues to unbutton and strip off his clothing.
Eve reacts with wide-eyed shock and a deep blush, realizing the nature of the misunderstanding.
Frantically waving her hands, the princess clarifies that she did not intend for a sexual service.
Blushing intensely, the blonde girl explains she only meant for him to sleep there, literally.
The princess apologizes for the misunderstanding and insists it is not what the knight bought.
Michaelis stands still with his shirt partially open, looking at the princess with a blank expression.
Mortified by the situation, the blonde girl covers her face with her hands in deep embarrassment. The knight covers his own face, realizing there was a much simpler explanation for the request.
Side profile of the knight shows his ongoing embarrassment after misinterpreting the princess's innocent rest invitation.
Eve looks at her knight with concern, wondering if his reaction is due to his mark.
Reaching out, the princess prepares to touch the knight's head to check on his current state.
A close-up shows the blonde girl's hand resting gently on the knight's forehead for examination.
Shimmering light appears as the princess uses stabilizing magic to calm her knight's chaotic emotions.
With a gentle smile, the blonde girl asks if her knight feels better after the magic.
The knight offers a small smile and confirms he feels fine now, thanks to her.
Eve pulls her hand back with a happy and relieved expression, ending the awkward moment. Chibi versions of the pair plan to pretend to be servers every Wednesday for cover.
Eve instructs Michaelis to pretend to be tired tomorrow morning to deceive their assistant, Sedella.
The knight nods in acknowledgement, accepting the princess's plan to maintain their secret palace alliance.
Smiling warmly, the princess calls their new secret arrangement a happy collaboration for the future.
The two shake hands firmly, sealing their pact to work together within the royal palace walls.
A stack of newspapers and documents rest on a desk as a new day begins. Eve reads the newspaper, noting the successful opening of a new public bathroom in the city.
Reports indicate the Lucier firm's new business venture is attracting a massive amount of public attention. Reviewing the files, the princess notes the success has already exceeded that of her past life.
A portrait of a woman in red suggests that the news has finally reached Brigitte.
Sipping tea, Eve anticipates that Brigitte is currently livid and venting her anger on others.
The princess thanks Sedella for her hard work and for ensuring all business matters go smoothly. Sedella smiles warmly as the princess expresses her full trust and entrusts her with more responsibility.
Chibi Eve reflects that she must ensure Sedella receives proper rest during their upcoming free time.
Eve is pleasantly surprised to hear from her assistant that a special item she requested is ready.
Two servants enter the room while carrying a long, heavy box draped in a red cloth.
A soft and expectant smile crosses the seventh princess's face as the delivery is brought forward. Michaelis enters the room with a calm expression, observing the large chest sitting on the table. Looking at the ornate container, the knight questions his mistress about the nature of the object.
Eve stands gracefully in her study and beckons Michaelis to come closer to the table.
Standing beside her knight, Eve reminds him of a previous promise she made regarding a gift.
The princess and her knight share a quiet moment of anticipation before the chest is opened.
Eve places a delicate hand on the lid of the silver-trimmed box to reveal its contents.
Michaelis watches with a focused gaze, waiting to see what the princess has prepared for him.
Inside the chest, a magnificent black sword rests atop red silk and surrounded by white flowers.
The blade shimmers with magical light, reflecting the high quality of the legendary craftsmanship.
Michaelis reacts with visible astonishment as he looks at the powerful weapon intended for his use.
A focused detail highlights the knight's formal uniform as the weight of the moment sinks in.
Reaching out, the knight prepares to take hold of the sword with deep respect and care. Michaelis lifts the heavy blade, examining its balance while a look of genuine appreciation fills his eyes.
Eve looks at her knight with a warm smile and asks for his opinion on the gift.
Michaelis finds the blade nostalgic and vows to stain it only in the service of his princess. The knight mentions the approaching beast hunting festival, shifting the conversation toward their upcoming challenges.
Narrative panels describe Calapagon, a remote island characterized by its rugged mountains and dense wild forests.
The text explains that demonic beasts are contained within a magical barrier on the island for hunting.
Explanations of the festival continue, noting that winners are chosen based on the number of monsters hunted.
An elder lord stands tall, viewing the coming assembly as a significant political and alchemical event. Michaelis observes that the sword embodies her intentions, a sentiment Eve confirms with steady resolve.
Eve requests that Michaelis follow her for a moment as she has a specific task to perform. Clutching the sword, the princess states they must relocate to the living room for the next step.
The pair walks through the bright, airy room toward the large windows overlooking the palace grounds.
Standing on the sunlit terrace, the princess and her knight face one another in private.
A rare look of serene confidence settles on Eve's face as she begins a formal address.
Eve holds the sword upright between them as Michaelis prepares to offer his formal submission.
The seventh princess addresses her knight with a singular, commanding word to begin the ceremony.
Michaelis drops to one knee in the sun-drenched garden, acknowledging his mistress's total authority.
A close-up captures the knight's profile as he focuses entirely on the princess's coming decree.
With a simple and respectful word, the knight confirms his readiness to serve her always.
Michaelis looks up and solemnly vows to fight for the princess throughout his entire life.
Eve formally declares that the knight is swearing an oath to become her personal horseman.
The knight pledges both his body and his soul to her service until his final day. A warm and gentle smile spreads across Eve's face as she accepts his sincere royal oath.
Eve reaches out and places her hand over his on the hilt of the black sword. The seventh princess formally acknowledges Michaelis Agneto as her knight among the blooming white lilies.
A peaceful atmosphere lingers over the pair as the formalization of their bond is completed.
Michaelis stares at the princess with a look of absolute devotion and renewed purpose.
Standing together in the garden, Eve offers a supportive hand as her knight remains kneeling. The two hold the sword together, symbolizing their shared path and mutual trust within the palace.
A focused look at Michaelis' face shows the deep intensity of his loyalty toward his princess.
The black sword glows against a starry background, highlighting the magical strength of their alliance.
Narrative text notes that training camp managers rarely witness such a profound and ceremonial moment.
Eve looks back at Michaelis with kindness when he addresses her title in the quiet garden.
Michaelis expresses a strong desire to repay the princess for the honor of the sword. Looking determined, the knight affirms his goal to prove his worth through his upcoming actions. Eve awaits a response, her expression remaining neutral as the conversation reaches a turning point.
The princess clears her throat, preparing to deliver her specific instructions for the upcoming trial.
Eve commands her knight to perform well enough to preserve her reputation without taking first place.
Michaelis smiles confidently, promising to deliver a triumph that exceeds even her royal expectations for him.
The knight offers a solemn promise to make his mistress proud through his future actions.
A grand harbor and military encampment stand ready as the expedition reaches the rugged wilderness.
Delicate boots step onto a formal platform, marking the official beginning of the hunting festival.
The royal pair stands tall together, projecting an image of unified strength before the assembled nobles.
Eve identifies their current location as Kalapagan Island, a place known for its extreme, untamed danger. Shadowy harpies circle the misty skies as Eve asks how her knight perceives the surrounding area.
Overlooking the landscape, Eve explains that the island is entirely populated by various lethal magic beasts.
Groups of high-ranking knights gather in the courtyard, their uniforms reflecting the gravity of the mission.
Seated at elegant tables, the visiting nobles observe the proceedings while servants provide for their comfort.
Eve maintains a focused and determined gaze, her mind fixed on the political stakes of the hunt.
Legendary chronicles describe the island as the ancestral birthplace of the catastrophic creature known as Galamet.
Addressing her knight by his title, Eve begins to prepare him for his departure into the wilds.
Eve unsheaths a ceremonial blade, Michaelis watching closely as she prepares to bestow a final blessing. The ornate weapon shimmers with intense magical energy, decorated with a symbolic blue ribbon for protection.
With a warm and hopeful smile, the princess bids her loyal knight a safe and peaceful journey.
Michaelis offers a final, reverent kiss to her hand, sealing his commitment before heading into danger.
Brigitte stands among the crowd of watching nobles, her presence adding to the tension of the scene.
A focused close-up captures Brigitte's calculating expression as she monitors the interaction between Eve and her knight.
A gray-haired woman watches the proceedings with visible contempt, her arms crossed in a judgmental posture.
The noblewoman's face contorts with a look of pure, unadulterated hatred as she glares at the princess. The scene shifts toward the dark and foreboding entrance of the monster-infested forest.
Eve looks on with a steady gaze, silently calling out the name of her departing personal knight.
Looking toward the horizon, the princess internally pleads for the safe return of her most trusted sword. Dark vines and thick foliage create a claustrophobic atmosphere within the heart of the magical forest.
The shadows of the cave deepen, hinting at the ancient and dangerous secrets buried within the island.
Distorted visions and text describe the tragic origins of the lowly created beings known as homunculi.
A sudden, sharp movement flashes through the darkness, signaling the start of a violent confrontation.
The oppressive atmosphere of the wild landscape grows heavier as the night ventures further into the unknown.
A malicious command echoes through the void, sentencing those who enter the depths to certain death.
Narrative panels shift the perspective back to the ancient history of the world centuries in the past. A massive red dragon soars through a crimson sky, representing the primordial chaos of an earlier era.
Fiery destruction rains down upon the mountains as multiple dragons wage a war that scars the land.
Historical records explain that a demon dragon appeared to ravage the world when divinity withdrew its protection.
The monstrous dragon roars against the bloody sky, marking the beginning of a long age of darkness.